Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1971 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Jane Fonda won for her performance in Klute. But why did she beat fellow nominees Julie Christie, Glenda Jackson, Vanessa Redgrave, and Janet Suzman? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 44th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1971. We'll be discussing how Jane Fonda won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is my friend. He's busier than I am, really. He's an executive editor at AwardsWatch, editor and co-host at In Session Film. He's a member of multiple critics groups. Been on the show a number of times, but welcoming him here for the first time on the Best Actress series. Welcome back, Ryan McQuade.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Kevin. And friend, I got that on the record. Oh my God. That's incredible.
It's official. You are my friend.
Oh. Well, I appreciate you having me on. This is always great. I've been listening to the series. It's been a while since I've been on the main show. I know I've done a couple of On Second Thoughts.
Yes.
But yeah, it's been a while, and I love the new format. And
Thank you.
I hope to all the listeners out there, I don't let them down, because this is, it feels like an enormous weight, even this year, to talk about. You know what I mean? So
yeah. Well, there's also some heavyweight actresses and heavyweight performances here. So there's very few lightness.
Yeah,
there's not much comedy in this.
There's not much comedy at all in this either.
Yeah.
But I hope that over our discussion we talk about a lot of great things, because it's a really interesting year, and one that lends to a lot of discussion, just with the performances, but also behind the scenes, a lot of stuff.
Yes. And also, I just wanted to say, I feel like in our past podcasts, it feels like we've talked about a lot of films that are about, like, men in general. I don't know why. I was looking back and just seeing, like, there's a lot of the Tarantino stuff and, all the President's Men and all that stuff. It just felt like, I don't know, we've been talking about a lot of male-centric films in the past, but here we get to talk about some women. How about that?
It's about time. I don't want to be branded as just talking about men. That's ridiculous.
The bro. Right.
Yeah, I don't want to be a
film
bro talker. You know what I mean? Like, that's ridiculous.
Right.
No. I'm so excited, and I can't wait to dive in.
Well, before we talk 1971, as I do every week, I love to ask my guests about Best Actress as a category. So my first question for you, Ryan, what is your favorite Best Actress win at the Oscars of all time?
Oh. I'm never ready for this, and I know the guests are never ready for this, because it's such a tough pick. I know it's kind of cliche. I know you've heard it before, probably. But my favorite Best Actress winner is Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs.
Great pick.
I think that performance is one of those first performances I saw when I was a kid that I was just like, God, I'm just obsessed with this. And I think that she's so good in that movie. She commands pretty much the entire film, and the fact that she had to fight for that role and really just like persuade the studio and Demi to give her a shot, and she had already won an Oscar, which is interesting. And then just when she is working in that film, those close-ups on her, the vulnerability, talk about a woman in a male-dominated field, in a male-dominated world. I just think that Foster is one of those great actresses of the 90s and of all time too, in my opinion. And I miss her when she's not around, and when she does stuff, she's still got that commanding presence in movies. And it all, for me, it all started with Silence of the Lambs, and then I went through her entire filmography.
Which is
Because
admittedly shorter than a lot of her contemporaries
it
because she
really
doesn't
is,
work all
but
that often
it's
nowadays.
it's very strong though.
Yeah,
There's a
it
lot of good
really
stuff
is.
in there,
Hmm.
and so yeah, that is my favorite.
Very good pick, and also very excited to eventually get to that year where we'll
Hmm.
also be talking about Thelma and Louise. But yeah, really, really strong pick. I wish that was her only Oscar win.
I don't think she would agree, but I agree as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think she would have been fine, and I would have been able to sleep better at night if another person perhaps had won that year,
I don't
who
know who you're
shall remain
talking about. I
nameless.
don't know who you're talking about.
So my other question for you is, on the flip side, what would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in this category?
This is very tough because I usually don't agree a lot with the Best Actress winners,
Mm,
particularly a recent. Like, besides Frances in 2020, I haven't agreed with a Best Actress winner since 2007, 2006. Not like they're controversial opinions. I think that there's a better performance lying within the nominations,
yeah, that's
that
fair.
could better represent the year and our better performances, and could also fix a lot of mistakes that I think
Mm-hmm.
that then makeup wins happen a lot, more recently
Yeah.
or throughout the history. I have a couple. I'm just gonna run them through real quick. Like, Michelle Williams for Blue Valentine is one that
Mm.
we wouldn't have to have her chasing one throughout her entire career. It feels like now, if we just gave her that award, it was pretty fantastic. Meryl Streep, I know she's got three, but her performance in Bridges of Madison County is my favorite performance
Mm.
by Meryl Streep of all time. I know that this is like you're taking away from an all-time performance, but I would take Sissy Spacek's Coal Miner's Daughter Oscar away, and I would give it to Mary Tyler Moore for Ordinary People. I think that that's an extraordinary performance, and that movie does not work if it doesn't have that complex performance by Mary Tyler Moore, and also rewarding comedic actresses doing dramatic work. It's something that the Academy still kind of refuses to do, both for male and female performers. And then, of course, Gina Rowland, 1974, Shirley MacLaine in The Apartment in 1960, and then probably Julianne Moore in Far From Heaven in 2002. Um,
Wow.
yeah, that's a lot, but
Yeah.
those are just highlighted in my brain of a lot of things that I would change.
Well,
Within.
I agree with you pretty much on the most part on all of those. So you're in the right place.
Okay. Whew.
You're in
All right.
friendly territory here.
I was trying to think of just one, but like most of them, I was just looking through. I was like, no, no, no. This would be better, because it's just
Hmm.
it to me. Like, sometimes this is just for any performer. It feels like they don't win for their best performance, or
Yeah.
they win one too late, or they win one too early, or something, and then their better performances come around, and you're like, why didn't that win? So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a little bit of like, have to play it. We do this all the time, Kevin. We play it like a game where we're like, okay, if we gave it to her here, then we could give it to her
Yes.
here, and then we can get rid of this, and then we don't have this mistake. It's like fixing a timeline.
The
And
butterfly effect. Yes.
exactly,
Yeah.
the best actress effect, as we would call it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a whole beautiful mind situation mapped out in my mind of
Is it A
how it should have
Beautiful
gone.
Mind, or is it more like Charlie Day from It's Sunny in Philadelphia, and it's just like a
Yeah, probably that.
manic murder board in the background? You know what I mean?
Yes, and it's just me pointing saying, Carol! That's me. That's me. That's specifically me in 2015
Yeah.
being angry that the Academy didn't give that Best Picture.
Yes.
So anyway,
Yeah.
a nomination.
Not
Even.
even. Yeah. I was just gonna say they needed to nominate it first before they could
Yeah,
even
I
award
know.
it.
I know. I know.
All right. I didn't want to bring up that. That's you know. Yeah.
It's a sore subject,
It's a very sore
But
subject.
anyway,
I'm just bringing
yes.
up old wounds. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what we do on this show, really. So, alrighty. Well, that's a very good list of nominees there that I'm really much looking forward to. I'll be talking about Jenna Rollins very soon, also Mary Tyler Moore very soon. So, yes. But let's talk about this year at the Oscars, the 44th Academy Awards. The nominees were Julie Christie in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Jane Fonda in Klute, Glenda Jackson in Sunday Bloody Sunday, Vanessa Redgrave in Mary, Queen of Scots, and Janet Suzman in Nicholas and Alexandra, with the winner being Jane Fonda. So before we break down these performances, do you have any overall thoughts just from binging this lineup over the past week?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting lineup. That's for sure. There are some performances I really like, and there are performances I've seen before, and then there was one or two that I hadn't seen. So it was interesting in going and diving into it. It was really interesting in diving into how this is a year where you could really see that Hollywood itself is kind of changing, and
Oh,
yet
yeah.
also still clinging to performances of the past rather than fully embracing that change. There's some particular performances in here. I sit here and I go, you don't have to nominate that because of the other things you nominated. It doesn't fit. And so it's really fascinating that where you're at in 1971 as opposed to like when you get later in the decade and decades later, how some of these performances, while they may be similar to some of these stuffy prestigious films, they have more of a modern lens and take to them rather than having the ways of the past from the 50s and 60s and stuff like that, and even the 40s. So that was really interesting to kind of see even the Academy still at a tug and pull, because nowadays they still have a tug and pull for various other reasons. But this in particular of like, what is the best actress performance? I think that's another great question to have here, because some of these performances, you're watching them, the female performances are almost secondary in a lot of them. And I hate to say that, because that sounds, usually that sounds like a controversial opinion, but if you sit down and watch these movies, some of these nominees, they are the co-lead or very much the secondary character to their male counterparts. So it'll be very interesting to talk about that aspect of their performances as well too.
Yeah, a lot of co-lead situations here. I do think it's a good lineup. Not one of my favorites of all time necessarily, but this is just a group of actresses that I do consider to be like real heavy hitters. And, like we were saying before, there's very little lightness to be found here in this lineup. A lot of heavy drama. But we do have some diversity in terms of the kinds of movies and the kinds of performances we have here. Period pieces, contemporary films that are, some of these I think are very indelible for me to what I think about when I consider like 70s cinema. And yeah, it's a really solid group. I think it's a race where I don't think there was a lot of suspense that Jane Fonda was winning this. So I'm definitely intrigued for our sort of breakdown of the race itself and who might have been second. We should also mention 4 of these 5 nominees, looking back from 2023, are Oscar winners. Sorry, Janet Suzman. I believe also, we have 4 British actresses here, and Jane Fonda is the only American. And we should also mark this as the first Best Actress lineup where all of the nominees, as of this recording, are still alive.
Yeah.
So how about that? Not all of them are working actively, but I just wanted to make a note of that we're now entering this era where most, if not all of the nominees are still with us, which is nice to see. I don't know. I don't have a further point on that. I just think it's
just a fun fact. It's a fun fact. Yeah. No, but it is great to see them still, some of them still working.
Some of them. Yeah.
Some of them, others aren't because they're retired or they're just older. You know what I mean? And so, but then you have like Jane, who's like an 80 for Brady. You know what I mean? And
exactly. And Book Club 2, her first movie being so successful that it creates a sequel.
My God.
So there you go.
I can't wait for... I can't wait for Book Club 3. I just want a whole trilogy. Them just flying around the world. This book club. It's
what they deserve.
Those movies are insane. But I love them. That first one made so much money. My God. Anyway.
I know. That's what I mean. All right. Well, we're starting off in alphabetical order with Julie Christie in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. So we got a returning winner here, getting her second nomination. This is 6 years after she wins for Darling. So to check in with what Julie's been getting up to in between all that, she's in a lot of high-profile films. She's very in demand. She's starring in these big sort of film adaptations of like Fahrenheit 451, Far from the Madding Crowd. Earlier in 1971, she's in The Go-Between, which wins the Palme d'Or at Cannes. She's a fashion icon. She has these like high-profile affairs with like people like Warren Beatty. She's really, hip and happening, as they say, at this time. And then here with McCabe and Mrs. Miller, she's working with a great Robert Altman, and this is the only time that we will be talking about a Robert Altman film in Best Actress, if you can believe it.
Shame. What a shame.
Yeah, he does get nominations for other actresses, but all of them being in supporting. But yeah, excited to talk about this one. This is a revisionist Western that takes place in the early 1900s. We're in Washington State, and it's all about a businessman, McCabe, played by Warren Beatty, who constructs this brothel. And eventually we have Constance Miller, Julie Christie, arriving in town. She's British, she's a madam, and she's basically like, this will not do. We have to make this a legitimate business. So it becomes a very popular location in town, and the two of them also develop a kind of relationship along the way. And then one day we have two agents from this big company arriving, hoping to buy out their business, which causes McCabe to stand his ground despite the protesting of Mrs. Miller. So let's get to it. Julie Christie, any thoughts on the great Julie Christie as an actress, and what do you think of her performance here in McCabe and Mrs. Miller?
I love Julie Christie. I think she's a great actress. She's, one of those actresses of the 60s and 70s for me that she just has a presence to her, Kevin. She just, there's something about her when she's on screen. And so it was interesting diving into her past and seeing from her first nomination to and win to this, and not having anything, not having an Afterglow nomination, not having
Afterglow would be in 97.
Yeah, that would be in 97. That's different. That's different. Yes. Nice pun work. But no, also too is that like she had been nominated for a ton of BAFTAs, so she was very much loved by the
BAFTA queen.
Yeah, she was like, she had like 2 or 3 BAFTA nominations in between.
Yeah,
so she was very much. And then what's funny is then like, okay, you think that she would get like BAFTA, and then she would get or a Golden Globe nomination with this. She just got this. This was it, and she's the only nomination for a movie that I absolutely love. It is my favorite Robert Altman movie. It's my favorite Western, a genre that I grew up watching, but then I saw this film in college, and it kind of just blew me away. I saw it on a really very rinkety sort of cut, because at the time we didn't have the restoration that we have now from Criterion. So it was like on this downloaded file, and it looked really weird, and the sound work was like mixed to say at best. But what you could make out was just when that movie starts, it has that great Leonard Cohen music, and obviously Warren Beatty's very sleazeball performance in this movie, and he's incredible. But then I think the movie goes into a second gear once Constance Miller comes into the fold, because McCabe is essentially this grifter. He's this guy that's trying to legitimize himself, trying to make as much money. He's trying to essentially rig the capitalist system, because if you haven't seen McCabe Miss Miller, this is like the companion piece to this is for modern audiences is like There Will Be Blood, the sense of a man or people trying to make the most they can in a capitalist society against big businesses and fighting up against those resistances. And so he's building, this town, the small town, up to be this, high pride commodity. And the problem is that he doesn't really know how to do it. He maybe knows how to do the gambling, but he doesn't know how to do like the bathhouse and the call girls and all those different things. And so that's where Constance Miller comes. She plays the madam essentially. And she's incredible. From the moment she's like eating those eggs, she controls, I think, the film. She controls him, especially. And even though he's wild, you know what I mean, in his decisions, she early on is able to convince him the importance of all of this. And then when he screws up entirely, she's so worried about what's going to happen to him, but necessarily you didn't find out it's not really about him. It's about the money that she's invested as well into this business. And I think that when I first watched it, obviously you get sucked in by Altman's impeccable direction. The cinematography is out of bounds. The use of Leonard Cohen's music is entrancing, intoxicating, and it's just a unique experience. And then Beatty's performance is so cartoonishly. He's such a dope that you get sucked into him. But then each time I watch the film over and over again, I get sucked more and more into Julie Christie's performance, and I think it's so layered. And I think that the reason why the final shot zooms in on Constance is because really us as the audience, we're supposed to really follow her, I think, a little bit more. And she's more interesting of a character than even McCabe, because he's very surface level. She's got a lot of nuance under her. I mean, she's very quiet, very calculated. There's a dark past to her that we kind of have to fill in the blanks with in terms of her. She's a drug addict. She's had a life and a history that he doesn't explain. And that's the beauty of Altman. Sort of, you have to kind of explain it yourself and fill in the blanks. But Christie's incredible in this. This is one of my favorite performances from her.
Definitely. For me, I was really taken with Julie Christie in Darling, her Oscar-winning role, especially because, like you're sort of saying, she has that sort of almost enigmatic presence that you really, I feel like you can't teach it. Like, either you have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And she just has this presence where I think the camera just loves her, really. And she's able to provide you with this sort of unexpected depth when you're not expecting it. And I think she's doing the same here in this film, on top of also pulling off what I think is a pretty accurate Cockney accent. So there is that.
It's pretty good. It's not,
Yeah.
Dick Van Dyke would wish he could do a performance like
yes,
this.
Exactly. Right. But unlike her performance in Darling, where she's, selfish and sort of doing whatever she wants because she also has this like deep sense of insecurity, Mrs. Miller is very confident in herself. She seems to know who she is. She knows her worth. She knows how to bargain with men. And she has this great sort of business sense. And she also knows how to treat her girls with fairness. And I love how right off the bat in her first meeting with McCabe, she just immediately asserts herself, and she's like, I could eat a bloody horse. And she orders the food and the 4 eggs and the strong tea. And she, she's telling him, like, don't wear such cheap cologne, like things like that. And she just has such a great confidence that really is in such contrast, I think, to the kind of feminine model type thing that people might see her as, and the way she sort of lays out her whole business proposition. She's like, listen, you don't know how to properly run this. I do. I know how to deal with whenever it's, their time of the month. I know what to do when they don't have that. And then there's this like issue of like what happens when business is slow. Also, maybe they're going to turn to religion. Then what do you do? And she's just like so, I don't know, just very self-assured and direct. And it's her charisma, I think, is just very attractive and powerful to the point that it's like McCabe is like bewildered by her and has no choice but to accept.
Yeah. I mean, he's very naive about the business, like you're saying. And even to the point where, like, I love the point where she's talking about, like, you want premier girls, you have to pay a price, and they'll pay it because they'll adjust to it. That is such a capitalist idea. It's such the demand is there. You're also, the way McCabe's doing, it's like, we're just going to set up tents outside. You know what I mean? And it's going to, and it'll be, like $1, $1 for an hour or whatever, or an experience. And she's like, no, we're going to do it in the house. You know what I mean? We're going to set a $5 rate, and we're going to bring in girls that are desirable enough to make this a profitable business. There's the scene too where he's talking to her at the bar about, essentially, because he's doing the numbers and everything, and he's furious at all the money he's spending, and she's explaining to him perfectly that to get money you have to put a bunch in. That's how this works.
Yes.
And you create something that is desirable, and then you sell it off, and then he refuses to sell it off. And then through his anxiety brings in, I think, the other part of this performance that's so good is that motherly, layered, but yet not fully romantic sort of connection that they have, because it's very, they're very much business partners. He's very much drawn to her like a moth to a flame, but she's definitely not interested in him like that, you know what I mean?
No, right.
But she also cares enough for him, because not just because of the money, but also because he is a fool, and she's kind of drawn to fools, you know what I mean, and drawn to, she's a fixer, you know, she's the ultimate, like, I can fix him, I can take care of him, you know,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, but also I have to take care of him because that's where my seed money lies, and that's where it's my business partner here. And I think that her frustrations by the end are completely justified by the ridiculous offer that he makes to the two guys coming in from big business, and then of course him going to like the lawyer and trying to negotiate with the bounty hunters and everything. But like, what's so great is after like those scenes, like there's the big shootout at the end, which is incredible. But she's accepted the fate of McCabe at the end of that. She knows that essentially she's kind of back to square one almost.
Yeah.
And it's truly tragic. It's very much a rise and fall. And you see it a lot through her, and how she is slowly losing, I think, that confidence in him and in the business they're running by the end, because she knows the inevitability of what happens. It's a small window, so you know what happens when you say no to a deal like this. And I think that by the end, Altman, that beautiful shot of just zooming in on her eyes as she's in the, I guess, the opium den.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's such a heartbreaking conclusion, and yet he ends it perfectly, not in the snow with John, but he ends it with her. And so I find that to be a lot more fascinating than just like, oh, bing bang boom. No, it's like Constance is the real person that gets ultimately affected by John mostly. And I just think that Christie, the way she just, like you said, Kevin, she has an ability, and that camera's on her. You feel things in that moment that every time it gets me. I get emotional every time I'm watching her, because you know that opportunities that you have in life are gone in a blink of an eye, and she's back, and when she's back to square one, it's truly tragic, and you don't know where she's going to go. It's a very vulnerable place to end your story, and I think that that's what's so magical about the film.
Yeah, totally. And what I think is just sort of brilliant is that when we think of this as like a revisionist Western or an anti Western, even, I think part of that also extends to this characterization of Mrs. Miller and Julie Christie's performance, because the way she's presented, it's like, she's brash and she has the Cockney accent and she's like a mother to these girls, like
Mm-hmm.
very conventional archetype that you would see in other westerns. But I feel like the way that she operates in the film, she's not like a cartoonish over the top figure, she's still very animated and very assertive and all that, but you also sense that this is what she knows will work in a business conversation, or like when she's handling her girls. And there's just a quality to Julie Christie where she never overplays it, and she just gives her this really great presence that draws you in even if you can't figure her out exactly. And I think that's very intentional, and I love how she gives a kind of dignity to her. I really get the sense that I don't know if you'd done research on sort of Julie Christie and her sort of approach to everything, but she's often talked about how she doesn't consider herself a real actress,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But I really sort of get this feeling that she really put in the time to think about Mrs. Miller and her background and how she got to be the person that she is today, and sort of filled in the blanks on the page. And even if she didn't write like a 100-page background like some actors would do, it sort of feels like she just knows instinctually how she would carry herself.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, like, that's the thing, you mentioned it at the top about Altman, and this being the only Best Actress nominee of Robert Altman has a ton of great female performances in his films,
Mm-hmm.
and he's able to, I think, work with actresses over and over again, and they trust him because they're able to get the creative space enough to find the character while also staying true to his vision of what he wants. I mean, like, I've seen all of his films pretty much, and the evolution of somebody like Shelley Duvall or Sissy
Yes,
Spacek,
definitely. Mm-hmm.
or Julie Christie, or or even towards the end of his career with movies like Gosford Park. He has this ability because he's like, we all think of Robert Altman as like the influence on Paul Thomas Anderson and all these other directors of the time, but he's actually, there's a lot of complexity and sensitivity to his characters, especially his female characters. But for me, I think that he's doing something different with a Western here, because there's a lot of Westerns, like a lot of female characters get sidetracked, or they don't have, I think, a lot of agency to be able to create such a layered and complex and heartbreaking performance. And they're really not given as much time as the gunslingers. And what's so great is, like, there are obviously the Western tropes here, but then shooting this in Vancouver, not shooting it in America, doing something that was completely against the studio, and wanting to do something completely different, and studios saying you can't do this. And it then you have a band of players together. He really bonded Altman with Beatty and Christie off camera to create this. And so much so, she like shows up in like a brief second in Nashville later on, because
Yes.
she's she's become with Altman this great collaborating experience. And so yes, she's able to, from what I know and when I read about this film, she's able to dive in a lot, because Altman has this ability of, like, somebody's name's on that script, but it's really Robert Altman on the script, and he just gives somebody else the credit, and
Mm-hmm.
because he's
Yeah.
Robert Altman.
Mm-hmm.
And with Christine, they formed this character together through her research, but then through his interpretation of the novel. Because and what's great about it too, and I don't think a lot of people remember this about the novel, but that's just called McCabe. He's the one
Yeah.
that calls it McCabe and Mrs. Miller. And that's why I think that she's so important to this movie, because of the fact that beyond just the performance, beyond just what Constance is going through, she is given as equal weight of, and is equal part of what is the American experience. What is it to be someone that is invested? And it's a real rise and fall, like I've mentioned, but yeah, I think that their collaboration together is truly something magical, because he gives actors complete space, and he's very experimental in what he's doing as a director. So for her to be able to come in and just kind of find this ease into Constance, while also the confidence, and carry all that emotional weight of McCabe's dumb decisions, and it kind of ticks like a time bomb, right? Up to a certain point where she's just crumbled by the end. It's a testament to Christie's dedication and performance, and Altman giving her the space to find that and create it. And it's one of those performances. It's one of my favorite performances. I'm just going to be hyperbolic here because it's just true. It's one of my favorite performances of all time, because of the fact that Altman's able to find the best thing that an actor can do and get the best out of them. Even maybe not in a great movie, the acting is always something that is constant throughout his movies. He is an actor's director. And with Christie here, she gives one of her best performances for sure.
Yeah, and there's two scenes that I'm thinking of that are small, but I think are very important and also indicative of the sort of show not tell quality that Robert Altman has. There's a scene where she looks at the widow, recent widow, Shelley Duvall,
Mm-hmm.
and she's at the funeral, and there's kind of this knowing look on her face, and you see that she sees an opportunity to recruit her to work at the brothel. And none of this is explicitly stated
No.
until it's later confirmed when she's like dressing her and sort of reassuring her that like she'll do just fine at the brothel and everything. I just find that to be such smart storytelling, combined with her performance to sort of communicate all of that without saying a single word. Like you're seeing just in the way she looks at Shelley Duvall, like she feels sorry for her, but also she's like, there's an opportunity here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's another scene that I think is really beautiful where it's so just evocative, where she is walking outside and it's nighttime and it's snowing, and she's just sort of reflecting on her situation and how McCabe is so stubborn and wanting to take these guys down, and she kind of knows she can't really do anything at that point. And I just appreciate that we get these small little scenes like that of her just thinking and considering her situation, because that's something that doesn't have to be there. But I think it was very important that he include that and sort of, like you're saying, just give the two of them an equal enough sort of weight.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, I think a lot of people, they think that you got to have dialogue in order to have equal performances. That's not how Robert Altman or particularly a lot of directors work. I mean, it's about the intention of those scenes. And you're absolutely right, Kevin, because even in that moment, right, where she's looking at Shelley Duvall there too, there is this sense of, there's another almost underlying thing that I take away from that too, where it's just like, it's foreshadowing. So what could happen or could come for her and McCabe based off of the fact that this just recent after the deal. So she's got that, but then her mind, like you're saying, can't turn off from being the businesswoman, from being the ultimate opportunist. And I think that the scene where she is getting Shelley Duvall in that outfit in the lingerie, she's doing it, but there's such a, like you said, a motherly intent, but it's also tender, but it's also like a mustache twirler almost at the same time, because it's very manipulative, and it's very much in line with how ruthless this time was. I think though by the end of the film, what's really interesting, like this is when McCabe finds this town and when she starts working with them, the town is very separated and kind of broken. And by the end of the film, when like the shootout's going on, she's in the opium den, what happens? The town kind of comes together and becomes more of a society based off of the fact that a brothel is born and gambling and everything, and people start to kind of unite together to save this church that's on fire. It's that the two things that brought this town together, no one's with those two commodities at that point. They're carrying on a life without them, and that's truly their legacy. It's not the money that they're going to get, it's the fact that these people have a home and a sense of that too. But yeah, and it goes back to right before the shootout, you're talking about she's frustrated with him, but yet she's still making him dinner. And he's sitting down and as he's eating, she gets real, angry, but then her volume goes down and it's motherly again. But then she goes outside, Leonard Cohen's music in that swirling wind, which Altman's just always got that great sound. It's that moment for her to breathe and realize this is it. This is the end of the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And leading up to that last shot, to revisit that, that last shot for me is just like burned into my brain, really. It's just this, I think it's this great combination of Altman's vision and the cinematography, and then in her sort of zoned out expression that is really sort of suggesting, I know that McCabe is gonna get himself killed. I know maybe I'll get bought out or I'll get screwed over. Who knows? It's all sort of inevitable. It feels like I've lost, So let me just have this moment to myself and try to deal with the pain of my situation as best I can.
Absolutely.
Basically.
Yeah.
And I just think it's such a powerful note to end on. If it did end on McCabe and it's just like, oh, well, we knew that this ending was happening, then I don't think that the film would be as powerful as if we ended it on Mrs. Miller.
Yeah, because I think that, as great as the shootout is, it is, the more I watch it, the secondary thing.
Yeah.
that's going on. I'm wondering where she's at. I'm wondering how the fire is going. Like,
Yeah.
he's making an anti-Western. A usual Western would end in the snow and probably have like a song play, that's more
Yeah, some kind
rousing.
of exciting
You know what I mean?
music, right? Yeah.
I
And
think
this
of
is
like,
just silent.
yeah, I think of like High Noon as like, like a
Exactly.
kind of like the
Yes.
movie that's a perfect example of like what
Mm-hmm.
this movie would want to be if it was doing traditional Hollywood standards.
Right.
And it doesn't do that because it subverts all those expectations. And that's what people loved about it, especially critics. It was a very big critics favorite,
Of
and
course.
and
Yeah.
it sort of carried that over because it had no precursors. It gets no other nominations, but
Yeah.
yet Christie's performance gets in as the solo one here, and I find that to just be really fascinating because there's I went back and I do my homework, folks. I went back and I listened to your conversation a couple years ago with Zach Laws about
Yeah.
this film and
Mm-hmm.
talking about how the cinematography, which is incredible in the film, was probably not to the Academy's taste still at the time. They hadn't evolved to that. Beatty, it's just a weird relationship that Hollywood has with Warren Beatty at this time.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Altman and the way that the movie was received is not as well received as something like MASH, and it's not as conventional as MASH. I mean, that movie is
Right.
very that's just a straight dark dated comedy.
Yeah. It's not as broadly entertaining.
No, it's
right,
not. And this
as
is
MASH. Right.
is trying to subvert things, but yet
Yeah.
I think that people were able to see Christie's performance in here and find that even though yes, it has that Cockney accent and it's a little over the top, there's still a lot in there. And I think what carries it, when I was reading some reviews about it, is that, like what we're talking about, that lingering shot at the end really kind of is the lasting impression that when you think about this movie. And then of course she has the go-between, so she has a really strong year. I would think that would get in probably, like, if we were predicting that year, like if we lived in 1971, we probably would assume that was going to be the film to do it.
Yeah. BAFTA nominee
BAFTA
for that as well.
Yep.
Yep.
But I am very happy that she got in for this.
Me too. Yeah, absolutely. This is a really, really good nomination, really good follow-up nomination. And I'm excited to talk about her in 26 years when she gets Afterglow nominated. Again, a really wild sort of Oscar track record for Julie Christie when you think about the different eras. Like, she gets a nomination every decade or two, basically.
And she has like a ton of work.
And comes close to winning on her fourth one.
Yeah, and she has like a ton of work, in between those 26 years that you would think, that they would want to nominate her, but they didn't. And it's a very weird trajectory for one of the great actresses of her time.
Yes. All right. Let's move on to our next nominee, Miss Glenda Jackson in Sunday, Bloody Sunday. The defending champion is here.
Yes.
Already getting her second nomination. And once again, we find Glenda Jackson in a film that deals with homoerotic themes. This was like really her specialty in the early 70s.
What are you saying, Glenda? You know what I mean? Like,
yes, right? Yeah. But this was also a very personal film for the director, John Schlesinger, who's also following up his own Oscar win for Midnight Cowboy. So, a lot of expectation going into this film.
Yeah.
I was reading about how Glenda Jackson was not the first choice for this. Vanessa Redgrave was actually sought to play the role, which is ironic considering we'll be talking about both of them in the next
couple
segment.
Minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Gene Simmons was a possibility, which would have been quite different, I think. But yeah, would have been interested to see that. But when John Schlesinger saw Women in Love, he was like, gotta get Glenda.
Yeah.
She's the one.
I get it.
Yeah. And he said he was nervous at first about working with her because she has that sort of powerful personality.
A little intimidating, it seems like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean? Yes. Maybe a little prickly. But yeah, apparently their styles really meshed from what I understand. And they obviously made it work. So Sunday Bloody Sunday is about the experiences of two people. Alex, played by Glenda Jackson, who is a divorced career woman, and Daniel, played by Peter Finch, who is a doctor, and how they're both romantically involved with this free-spirited artist, Bob. And we see how both of them know about the sort of arrangement that Bob has with them. And there's some tension in that. But it's also exploring how both of these people, Alex and Daniel, are trying to find fulfillment in their own very specific early 70s ways. So let's talk Glenda Jackson. Ryan, thoughts on the great Glenda Jackson, another great we're talking about here, and her performance in Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Again, Glenda Jackson, just another actress. Her resume speaks for herself. I think women love such a fantastic film. You know what I mean?
Yes. Agreed.
Her performance truly is one of those where, like, yes, it speaks for itself. If I had to do like a tier ranking, it's in a very, very high tier for that movie. And I mean, she's an actress at the time where, if you want to go down this more serious route, want to have someone that has a deeply layered, performance, I think that she's one of the best ones to find. I think also too, she's not afraid. She's to tackle any subject, which is great because the thing about Sunday Bloody Sunday, it wasn't really about Glenda Jackson when I was doing the research. That obviously this movie, her performance is. We'll talk about that here in a second. That wasn't the hard performance to secure. The hard performance is to secure with the male performances, because at the time, still, in 1971, as everyone knows, this movie was ahead of its time. It's controversial, not controversial in today's sake, but definitely in terms of 1971, because if you were perceived to kiss a man on screen, certain actors thought, that's the end of my career and I'm never going to be able to do anything ever again. And Peter Finch was the original choice, but he had some scheduling issues and they went through a couple of other actors and it came back around and it went to him. And the movie is such an interesting depiction of bisexuality. Being bisexual, I was watching it. It's very much a movie that taps into the emotions that one feels when they're tugged into two opposite directions with their heart. And really, it's not even about truly the figure that is connecting them. It's about the two people that are connected to the figure, which I find actually a lot more interesting. I think that when you think about the film, you think about these two other performances. And unfortunately, I will say that when watching it again, I do still feel like there is a little bit more of an imbalance in this movie to Peter Finch than Glenda Jackson. Yeah. I think that's probably on purpose because of Schlesinger and his. He put a lot of himself into Finch's character, right? He puts a lot of himself in Daniel, middle-aged man, Jewish man, gay man. So I understood all that. I get that. I mean, talk about endings of movies. The ending of the movie is literally Daniel looking and talking about to the audience about how he is missing Bob. And we don't get that from Alex, played by Glenda Jackson, but we get, I think, enough from her perspective because we start the movie with her and we end with Daniel. And I think that Glenda Jackson's really good here. She gets a lot of scenes that are different than Daniel because there's a potential other romance that she sort of taps into or tries to explore, but she's still drawn to Bob like a moth in a flame. It's that both of these performances from both Finch and Jackson, they're tapping into what is basic human nature when you're in love with somebody. This ability of, why do I have to share? Why would I want to share? I love you. And yet their partner has half of their heart connected to another person. And really, even at times, it's not even connected to either one of them, it feels like. And there's a deep sadness in a lot of Glenda Jackson's work here. And I think that she's perfect for this role because it's one that has to be very finely drawn, or it's delicately balanced between being possessive, but also being someone that is internally figuring out that this arrangement might not actually be the healthiest thing for them. And even though that she keeps going back to it, there is an innate ability emotionally and mentally to realize that when Bob leaves for America, that it's the best thing for her. And she doesn't have resentment, because she has resentment for Daniel throughout the entire film, because this is the person that is taking up literally my time with the person that I love. And I think that that scene at their mutual friend's house by the end of the film is actually really great. Probably where I would have ended it. I would have taken out the scene with Peter Finch, because I think that the movie's supposed to be about the two of them, and that decision at the end really does solidify that it's more about Daniel than her. But I think she's really, really good in this movie.
Yeah, totally. I think she's excellent in this film, honestly, and it's such a great choice for her career-wise too, because yes, you can see Glenda Jackson as this sort of focused, direct person as she was known prior to this, and there are elements of that here in her sort of career stuff, but you're also seeing a much more vulnerable and almost a delicate side to her. And when you think of Glenda Jackson, you do think like, self-possessed, very aware of herself and of others, and sort of not particularly caring what other people think, and just like fully confident. And here it's like we see her as this sort of, business professional, and just like with Women in Love the year before, she just immediately sinks into the character and feels very comfortable. And you see just in their relationship that, he's a very sensual person, and you see why she would be so attracted to him, even if he's not as fully present because of his situation. And I feel like you're just seeing also in the beginning how she doesn't really care about the idea of children. She, lets the older kid take care of the crying baby. She doesn't seem to know what breast milk looks like in the fridge. These sort of classic little tropes of like, oh, this is a career woman. Like, she also doesn't seem to care that the kids are smoking pot. Sure.
I mean,
it's the 70s.
Yeah, I was like, it's the 70s, but also like, wow, I forgot about that. When I was rewatching, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Kids are just smoking and joint in the middle of the bed. It's great.
Yeah.
They had a really great afternoon, probably. Like a ton of sandwiches and ice cream, I would assume.
Indeed. Yes. But yeah, she's just clearly very comfortable as like this independent woman who also happens to be madly in love with this guy. And I love that we get this a few times in the film where there's kind of lingering shots of her watching Bob, like when he's sleeping, and you really see her, like her vulnerability there, how much he means to her, and it just establishes why it's so hard for her to even think about letting go of him, even if his situation with Daniel makes it very messy and not very ideal. And so, yeah, I think I really appreciate how she is able to also give, like I said with Julie Christie, a certain dignity to this character, and to not make her kind of pathetic and clingy. So I like that aspect of her performance, is that she really seems to understand a three-dimensional view of this person, and not want to just make her like the tropey sort of, I need this person and you're the only person I can think about. Like, she still has her own wants and needs. So I like that.
I do like that too. And I think that through those wants and needs is where I think that she thrives the most. I mean, obviously there's like, I actually feel more for her, because I feel like of this three people relationship.
Threesome.
Yeah, of this threesome, she's the third wheel.
Yeah, a little bit.
lot of it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
she's the, but also too, like you said, she's very career focused. So like, we don't get to see like a scene where like, Bob and Daniel are essentially hanging out with Daniel's friends, or we don't see the, like You're talking about this weekend getaway, yet he literally leaves her with these children to go
Yeah, like
and
5 children.
like 5
Yeah,
children and a
which is not
dog.
easy.
You know what I mean?
Right.
To leaves Alex alone, who like does probably not want to be alone with all of them, so
Mm-hmm.
that he can go meet up with Daniel for like a couple of hours and there is that frustration she has.
Yeah.
It's not even about the fact that they're not spending time together, even though that was specifically what the conversation about. It's the idea of you abandon me or something, and we have this agreement, and it's a very delicate line and it's a very delicate agreement, but like when you're here, you're supposed to be here. When you're there, you can be there. I don't care. I don't need to know about any of that stuff. And she's very mad at Bob, but she is definitely more angry at Daniel. And so when Bob kind of comes crawling back to spend some time with her, she's seeing or trying to potentially see somebody else, trying to connect to somebody else because she's tired of that. But then of course she's drawn back to Bob, and it's very complex because when you are in love with somebody and yet they're not entirely invested in you, you don't know whether that'll change. You don't know whether it's you, it's them. There's a lot of emotions, and Jackson to me is able to convey that with not a lot of time. It feels like I don't feel like she gets enough time. I don't think we spend enough time with Alex because of the fact that the director is clearly writing more from his perspective, and certain characters are gonna probably fall off. I get that, but for me, I wanted a little bit more of that, but I wanted more for her. That being said, though, Jackson elevates what she has because it's a lot of the
Right.
things she's not saying. We talk about it a lot with Julie Christie just a couple of minutes ago. It's a lot of those, the camera being placed right on her, and she's saying a lot with her eyes, and she's saying a lot with her body language, and just how almost broken she is. And she's reached that point before anyone else in this relationship has reached. I think she has reached a maximum point of, shit or get off the pot, with this
Right.
whole thing. And yet I think she knows that when Bob's going to go to America, she's broken about it. There's for sure. I mean, she's saddened by it, but not to the extent of Daniel. Like you can clearly see that like Daniel is like this might be the only shot for her, but that's also a conversation about the time. A woman like Alex could probably find another man because that's how society was, and sometimes still is. And so you could truly see that while she is happy, that she could be hiding that. People are able to hide their pain and happiness all the time. And that's what I kind of think of it as the end. It's like I would have loved to seen like a flash to her talking to the camera, essentially about like, I'm still
Yeah, that
broken,
would have been smart.
even
Yeah.
though I'm trying to be happy about this and move on and focus on my career, because that's what she would do, right? She would focus on her career
Mm-hmm.
and she would try to forget about it, but there is still a hole that is missing.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that when we do focus on her, that she does make the most of her material,
Yeah.
for sure. I do think that her very commanding Glenda Jackson presence helps it still feel like it is equal, at least to me. I do really like the sequence where she is caring for the kids, obviously, and eventually she's sort of getting the hang of it. And it's when Bob and they're sort of going out into the park or wherever in the city, and the scene where they're in that area and one of the kids runs across the road and the dog gets hit by the car, and she's like yelling at the kid from across the street, sort of questioning why she did that. Really tense scene. You really feel the stakes of that, and then following that with her sort of sitting there and imagining what would have happened if the girl was hit by a car. And it sort of goes into this almost surreal area where she's also sort of remembering herself as a child, and we get these sort of indications that she was maybe not raised with a lot of tender loving care, I guess you could say, and you begin to understand why she has that bit of distance, but also that just like intense attachment when she does really fall for someone. It's just like, you are my whole world.
No, for sure.
So I appreciate them sort of filling in the blanks of how she got to be the way that she is, kind of a fractured person. She's someone who I think could use a bit of therapy, much like we see with Jane Fonda in Klute. I feel like we could get a lot of stuff from her in like a therapy type situation there. Just saying.
Yeah.
But ultimately, though, I do think I just love her blending of that strong, confident Glenda Jackson presence with the insecurity of her situation and the kind of contradiction of that. Because she should be so in control of her emotions and know how to handle this situation that she knows deep down, like, this is not good for me. I know this, but she's just not capable of going to that next step of just like breaking it off or doing what's best for her. But yeah, I love how she never goes so far in the other direction to make her seem like weak-minded or unstable even. Because I think that would be a very shallow approach to this character. And Glenda Jackson is not a shallow actress.
No, she's very smart at what she does. And I mean,
yes.
Everything that she does is very, very purposeful, and you relate to it.
Yeah.
Because like you're mentioning, I mean, it could go in such a way where it is very over the top and it's almost clingy and very, but it's very relatable what she wants. I mean, she's at a certain point, someone in this relationship was going to ask the things that she's going to ask and feel the things and the conflict that is inside of her. You know what I mean? And so it's very real. Would I want it a little bit more? Yes. But does what we get very good and very, very much true to the character? Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And I also just wanted to highlight one very, really strong scene for her where after she sort of quit her job and she finally has some clarity about the situation and she's breaking down in front of him, knowing that they just don't have a future together. And she's just kind of asserting that this doesn't have to do with Daniel. Like, it has to do with herself and their relationship. And I don't know, it's just like such an excellent scene that just demonstrates really her full range and her ability to just tap into these raw emotions that not a lot of actresses, even at that time, maybe were capable of.
The self-recognition is...
Yes, exactly.
It's the best thing for her. It's the best thing for the both of them. Fortunately, on the other side, it takes a while to get that even, and that's where, I mean, maybe that's where it goes to the end for her. But I feel when I watch it, there is something still lingering there. You can say all that, but we all know that we say things to get that out. You know what I mean? But our bodies and our minds are just not fully there yet. And I don't think she's fully there yet. I don't think she will be for a while. And that's what's so heartbreaking about the film. It's very good. It's a very good movie.
It is very good. Yeah. Very underrated.
Yeah.
And also I wanted to mention, since I know you're a Criterion Collection person, let's talk about how we have 3 of the 5 nominees here in the Criterion Collection. That doesn't happen.
It was very easy to pull those off the shelf to do this exercise.
Yes.
Also, too, three Criterion Collections where the covers are absolutely perfect, like
gorgeous. Yes.
McCabe Miss Miller one. This one is gorgeous. And then when we talk about Klute, like that one's kind of just perfect. As well too. So yeah, I mean. Criterion, I guess they've got 2 other films from this year in this lineup to go and grab, I guess. But I don't know.
I don't think that's happening.
I don't think that those are movies particularly like they would want to invest in. But
we'll see. I mean, we're gonna talk about them in a couple minutes here. So, did you have any other thoughts on Glenda, Miss Jackson, if you nasty?
No, I just think that it's a great performance. It's one that I've come back to a couple times because I think a movie like this is so fascinating, even still today. I wish there were more movies that tackled into this, because I still think that this is almost like a movie that is destined for a baton passing. You know what I mean? For
Oh
someone
yeah,
with a modern
certainly.
sense to take this
Mm-hmm.
and really go into more of the complexities that this movie is doing and then is not doing. I just think that I commend Schlesinger, who's just a really underrated director. We really don't talk about him enough as one of the
I
greats.
know. Mm-hmm.
But because he's able to get great performances. I mean, he worked with Julie Christie on Far From the Madding Crowd. But yeah, I just think all these performances are he's able to find like a real nice relatable balance to all of them, and they don't feel cartoonish, they don't feel like
Yeah.
caricatures. And yeah, I just kind of every time I watch this movie, I leave it and I go, God, I sit there and I was like I was watching this, Kevin, and I was just sitting on my couch and I was just like, God, I'm gonna be thinking about this way too much. Person that already thinks about movies too much, but then like you add you add a this complex look at bisexuality and the
Yeah.
relationships that
In
you kind of
1971. Yeah.
1971, you're like,
Yeah.
how did it get made? How did they all,
Right.
it's a
And how did it turn out so well and
yeah.
without feeling like dated in any way? I don't
No.
think.
No, I don't think it's dated. I think
Yeah.
it's because it's from I think personal experience. I don't think it's not built
Yeah.
on
The
a lot of like you were
perspective. Right.
saying, it's not built on
Mm-hmm.
caricatures, which I
Right.
appreciate so much. Like it's about human beings.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think ultimately is so great about it is like it's a movie that's just built off of like real emotions rather than like fake movie ones because we see that crap
Right.
all the time. And I would just like it if more movies did this, where they worried about the human condition of this relationship rather than the label of this whole
Yeah.
relationship.
Very well said. Definitely. I agree. It also didn't make a whole lot of money. We should just
That's
mention
not
that.
surprising. It was
But I
kind of
appreciate
controversial.
that the Oscars still recognized the artistry of it for what it was and gave it what, like directing also, right? And
Screenplay.
actress, actor, and screenplay,
Yeah.
basically everything in the top 5 but Best Picture.
Mm,
Maybe we'll explore a question on that later.
mm.
But yes. Yes. Anyway, let's move on to our next nominee. A very easy transition here. We've got Vanessa Redgrave in Mary Queen of Scots.
Very
So yeah,
easy.
obviously
That's
we have a
such an
Glenda
easy.
Jackson double feature.
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
got a lot of Glenda this week for the both of us.
Yes.
But Vanessa Redgrave, this is her third Oscar nomination following Morgan in 1966 and Isadora in 1968. In another 6 years, she'll finally win her Oscar for Julia,
Yeah.
which is in supporting actress.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I won't be talking too much about her, although I will be talking about Julia, as we know, because Jane Fonda is nominated in lead. So maybe I'll mention a few things about Vanessa Redgrave there. But yeah, speaking of powerful actresses sort of teaming up, Vanessa Redgrave is here with Glenda Jackson in this classic story of Mary Queen of Scots and Queen Elizabeth I, who were cousins. This production was many years in the making, with many other possibilities that were in talks to play Mary, including Maggie Smith
Mm-hmm.
and Mia Farrow. Don't know how that would have worked, but
Nope.
would have been interesting. But yeah, eventually we did get this like version where we have like two of the cool, most in demand British actresses of the time, really. So
Yeah.
Mary Queen of Scots, like I said, it's about the titular Mary Queen of Scots,
That's very important.
who is yes, she's recovering from her husband's death in France, and she's called to reign as queen in Scotland. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is fearing that Mary will be a threat to her crown because she doesn't have children.
Mm.
So she concocts a scheme to have this sort of handsome but very childish lord, played by Timothy Dalton, go to Scotland to woo her, which he does, obviously, and she quickly regrets it. And there's plenty of political intrigue from there, and spoilers for real life, it ends in her death.
How dare you, Kevin?
Sorry to the audience, but Mary Queen of Scots does die.
Mm.
Anyway, let's talk Vanessa Redgrave. Any thoughts on her as an actress, and what do you make of also this version of Mary Queen of Scots and Vanessa's performance? Because we did have one a few years ago.
Okay. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
I think that when I think of like prominent British actresses, one of high esteem and critically acclaimed from the stage to the screen, Vanessa Redgrave is one of those, that you just by name only, and then you see the work, and she's a great actress, and at times very effortless. Almost it feels like it makes sense when you're watching this movie that of course Mary Queen of Scots is played by Vanessa Redgrave. Like if it was somebody else, it would be a mistake. Like
Right place, right time.
right
This is
place,
exactly when she should play it. Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
perfect time for
Yeah.
her in her career. Right. She's also what a lot of people don't really know about. She's kind of a rebel. You know what I mean? She's like
She's kind of a badass.
we hear a lot, and we're going to talk a lot about Jane later, but like during this time
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
Vanessa Redgrave was right there with her. I mean, she's
Mm-hmm.
holding her own as a political activist, as someone that could speak on social issues. She was not afraid to put herself out there, which I deeply respect, especially for like actresses in the 70s, just in actresses in general, because Hollywood is such a, as you know, Kevin, you cover actresses and have covered actresses for a long, long time, and your listeners know, people treat actresses like shit in this industry,
Yeah.
and
No
and
kidding.
it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Because if
Still do.
a man
Yeah.
speaks out about an issue, they get a medal of honor. A woman does,
Yes.
where, oh well, she's not making movies for 10 years now, so
Right.
it's
Shut up and act.
exactly. It's
That sort of
it's
thing.
completely, hypocritical,
Mm-hmm.
even in something that is considered a more liberal profession. And then it goes back to what we were talking about this at the time. I think this is a perfect time to talk about what I was saying earlier. You have someone like Vanessa Redgrave, who is very much a modern woman talking about modern issues, and yet she is in a movie that feels very much still of a time period that is being slowly phased out. The historical epic, the giant story that is now. Mary Queen of Scots is a very, I think, still timely story, because it's all about how men are manipulating women of power, even when the women are queens, essentially are manipulating them to the point where they're turning them against one another. And then ultimately, one is killing the other when it doesn't have to be like that. And I think the new film tries to get at that
Yeah.
approach a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
but I still don't like that new film, because I think that directorially speaking and tonally speaking and performance wise, it's a bit all over the place. So when I was going into this one, I had not seen this version, because I saw that version and was like, well, I don't need that exercise. But Kevin said, come on for 1971. So I said, okay, I will sit down and I will watch this version. And I will say this is that I like this version a lot more than I
Yeah.
did that newer one from 2018. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it has a lot to do with two actresses who are far more along and better, I think, in their careers at this time than the two that we were presented in 2018. Like, I love Saoirse Ronan to death, but like, that script does not do her any favors. And Margot Robbie's performance in the 2018 version doesn't hold a candle to Glenda Jackson's performance, I think, in this. And I think also, too, this movie does a lot in terms of establishing its stakes and establishing more of the world and a more of the political intrigue than that one does. And this one also establishes the relationship between the two of them by the third act, that I think is exceptionally important to why Mary is executed in the end. And
Mm-hmm.
that movie sort of has this one scene in 2018, and that's it. And then there's text, and then you're done. And it just feels very you're left kind of empty by the end of it. This movie, because of the time, or the kind of movies they were making, they were allowed to give them a couple more scenes. And also they were smart enough to know we have Vanessa Redgrave and Glenda Jackson on set. Let's make a couple of scenes together where they're both going at each other with this political ideology and this religious ideology, and cultural differences between the two countries at the time, and the mindsets. And so I think that it's really good in the third act. That being said, I think Vanessa Redgrave gets a little bit lost overall because the film, someone one day is going to make a great Mary Queen of Scots movie, and they're going to actually focus it on the titular character, because this movie gets kind of lost when Timothy Dalton comes into the fold, the flashbacks to the flashes to Glenda Jackson, who's giving a very committed performance again,
Oh
prickly,
yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
all the right tones for Queen Elizabeth here. And so it's a very understated performance, and it's also very like Vanessa Redgrave's very much like, no, how dare you? How no, like for like half of for like half the film, like, no, don't do that, and all these men are really dominating the conversation. But then when the third act kicks in, that's when Vanessa Redgrave really shines, and the performance really starts to sing and come through, because you feel, even though you kind of didn't feel it in the moment, by the end of the movie, you feel the journey that this woman has gone on, the mud that she has been dragged through, and then the stances that she's taking. You ultimately feel she feels justified, I think, in those. So it's a very weird, it's a very uneven movie. We talked about Sunday Bloody Sunday recently, just a couple minutes ago. We're talking about how open that is about bisexuality and sexuality. This movie then, like, because it's more as a studio film, like Timothy Dalton's character is just like like they refuse to really have him go all the way there, even though we historically know that character, that person was gay, and that marriage was definitely a sham from the beginning. And I will say
Mm-hmm.
that is something that the 2018 version definitely dives into more and commits to.
Right.
But ultimately, I thought that by the end of this movie, when I think of Vanessa Redgrave and Glenda Jackson in a Mary Queen of Scots movie, I think of the last 30, 45 minutes of this movie as what I kind
Yeah.
of want. And it's kind of,
That's what the audience is craving
and that's what they
for
get
the
in the
first.
end. But
Yeah,
the
right.
journey up there is a little rocky. But by the
It
end,
is.
it's very worth it.
Yeah. So, as I established in the 60s season, I do really like Vanessa Redgrave, even if I haven't been a big fan of her films that she was nominated for in those early years. Unfortunately, I can't say that much has changed here for me. With Morgan and Isadora, it was more like just like the very eccentric style of Carol Rice that didn't really jibe with me.
Mm.
Here, I just think the film is a little too dull until that third act, like you mentioned, and honestly, a little cheap. Like, there's something really unappealing about, like, I don't know, certain period pieces in this era are just not fun to look at. Just like the visual design does not work for me, and that is very much the case here. So that is a little bit distracting,
Mhm.
but what is also distracting, actually, is that Glenda Jackson has the far more compelling part and performance as Queen Elizabeth. And, even though Vanessa Redgrave is dealing with the many ups and downs of Mary's life, it really just didn't connect with me. I get the idea that Mary's emotions and her life is really in flux at this time, right?
Mhm.
And I think to a certain extent, Vanessa Redgrave is sort of appropriately all over the place in that regard. Like in the beginning, we're seeing that she's basically, before she's gone through any of this tumultuous stuff, pretty much pure and sort of uncomplicated, really. Just like obviously not openly plotting like Elizabeth is, probably naive and a little too trusting of others who are advising her. But I just feel like as it goes on, the story sort of feels very predetermined for me, in the sense that, like, I'm not feeling that she is actively guiding very much of the story and even this character in her arc. It just sort of feels like this happened and then this happened and then this happened to Mary Queen of Scots, and she's just following what the story is rather than her, I don't know, sort of emotionally getting into it, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. She has, like, Mary Queen of Scots, such an interesting.
Yeah, on paper, a great role, right?
Every time I get into this, to this movie or this property, this person's life.
This
I
IP.
don't this IP. Well, I mean, it's like got like 6 versions of it now.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is like I think of like, I just think about it. I'm like, this is such an interesting person in history. And it's so interesting like that every time you think about all the other things that associate with this story, this marriage, this relationship with Elizabeth, the political intrigue behind the scenes, the backstabbing, all this different stuff. Every time I watch this, everybody decides to ultimately make her, from the get-go, a very secondary character.
Yeah.
And try to heighten the other things that are around her rather than actually focus in on the deep emotional problems that this character is facing. I do feel like you get more every time I watch those films. It feels like Elizabeth, they're trying to make Elizabeth more of the character because it's Queen Elizabeth, for God's sakes. Like Margot Robbie's, like we're seeing like the makeup transformation and the hair and all that stuff. And then here it's all the things that, yes, Glenda Jackson, who is incredible, I think, in this movie too.
Absolutely.
And is perfect for this role. It feels like because she's so good and we get a lot of stuff even early on, like we shouldn't see Elizabeth, mind you, in my opinion, for this property until like halfway through the movie. Like if you want, you need to set up what happens with Mary and everything and not go back and forth, because this is not, this is not an equal story. You're protecting the film is sympathetic to Mary's story and everything, and her downfall then becomes Elizabeth's benefit by the end. But then you throw in, I think, one of the most baffling characters in Timothy Dalton, because he's so over the top, and he's so and so when he's going at 11 and Vanessa Redgrave's giving you like a 4 or 3 at best, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It does not work. It's not the same thing. And you're not matching it, in terms of, okay, well then get her up there or get him down, for Christ's sake. And so, but then when he's gone and he's out of it, and then the movie focuses on someone that is completely desperate and the whole country has finally turned against her, that's when she shines. And that's when this movie starts going. But is it a little too late? Overall, yes. Overall, it is very much still too late. Like this is not a movie. I was like sitting there and I was just kind of like just waiting for it.
Waiting. Yeah.
And then it gets somewhere, and I was watching it, and I was sitting there watching the scenes between Redgrave and Jackson. I was like, oh, this is actually good. Oh, no, this is good. This is great. And it kind of like, it's like when you wake up from a nap and when you're watching a movie and then you're like woke up at a different point and you're like, wait, is this movie good? Should I rewind it and make sure the rest of, and it's like, no. Have confidence in yourself.
It's
Ryan,
not you. It's the movie. Yeah.
It's the movie. It's the movie is a slog to get through, to get to, it's really great pieces by the end, because that last, I wouldn't say 45 minutes, maybe it's the last 30 minutes, I guess you could say, is great. And it's what I would have wanted the entire movie to be, for having 2 actresses being on the exact same level, knowing the history, knowing everything at that point, and just throwing dialogue at one another that is piercing. There's so much intention and so much history behind it that you feel both sides' angst and anger, and yet also how they're both heartbroken by how this situation has got to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love their meetings. Like, really, honestly, everything leading up to the meeting, I just really struggle with, to be honest, in terms of just finding like an emotional center for what Vanessa Redgrave is trying to do. I found a book on Vanessa Redgrave, and there was some indication that it's sort of speculation more than confirmed, but it's saying like something to the effect that her mind is elsewhere during the making of this film, like she's not fully connecting to it, which makes a lot of sense now having watched it, that she doesn't feel fully clicked into place really until that. And I mean, there are a few moments throughout the film where she gets to be a little more explosive, which I think she's really great at, sort of the quiet to then explosive moments that you're not expecting. But yes, the meetings where they have their joint sleigh, as the kids would say, where Elizabeth is just making it very clear, like, listen, I'm not going to help you. Like, in fact, I'm going to take you prisoner. And then with Mary, in her way, sort of realizing what the game is here, she's saying, oh, you're just kind of jealous, basically, of my ability to have children. That's kind of the extent of it. And I think she really, really nails that monologue where she's just kind of tearing her down. We do know from history that they never met, or at least is on the record of having never met.
Correct.
Which is another thing that the 2018 version of Mary Queen of Scots does do, is the two of them meeting, as you said. But
neither are completely historically accurate.
Right.
So if anyone that says that they are is relying on themselves. Like this, I mean, but
it's needed for dramatic effect.
Exactly.
Right?
You need that, because it's like, okay, yeah, they didn't meet, but like, how could you, if you're not a writer, want to put a movie with two actresses or duos at the time?
Yeah.
And not want to put them together in a scene? Like, it doesn't make any sense, because then an audience would be like, why the hell aren't they in a scene? So thematically, you're right, it makes sense. But like historically, no, it's not accurate at all.
Yes. So that's whatever. I don't mind at the end of the day.
I don't either.
At least it gave us an exciting scene here.
I don't either. I know people are like, with this property, it's like it's a very beloved story. You know what I mean?
Sure.
For historians and everything. But it's like, but yeah, you have to heighten it for dramatic effect. Every story is like that. Yeah.
And then the other scene where they're meeting, where she's just held prisoner at that point, is really good as well, where she's, obviously fighting back again in her own way that I appreciate is different than Elizabeth's aggression, I would say. Yeah. So I think, like I said, though,
that's her bringing that's her bringing the receipts.
Right.
Elizabeth.
Exactly.
She's like, I got this letter. Yes. I got this letter.
Yes.
She's like, you are trapped here, lady. And she's like, no, I'm not. Kill me. I don't care. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's my favorite scene of the movie, because it has like actual life in it, even though we're talking about essentially death.
Yes. And then just her after that, sort of making peace as she's preparing to be beheaded. Spoilers for real life. It's really, I appreciate feels like it's sort of clicking into place in the third act as to what this movie is supposed to be about, and they're kind of like having a perspective, because I feel like, again, like the first 2/3, it's just like very Wikipedia entry for me. Yeah
It's almost wandering, like, and trying to figure it out as it goes. And
pretty
it's like,
much
that's not what you're supposed to do here. Be confident. Like, these are very interesting people you're talking about.
Yes.
Yet it just and also it feel, I don't know if you felt this, did it feel like scenes were missing?
It feels pared down to me. Yes, it does.
Like somebody took a longer cut of this and edited out like transitions from scene in the first 2/3. Like I was I was sitting there, I'm like, wait, how are we jumping already from this point? Like, these people just wanted to kill her 2 minutes ago, and now they're like on her side again. It's so weird.
Yeah. Very all over the place. Yeah.
I don't know. Someday, Kevin, someday someone will make this property into a very, very good movie.
It's you. Maybe you're the one that
I don't
finally guess.
I don't need those. See, I don't need people coming after me either.
Queen of Scots. That's
I
true.
don't need. Yeah, because then if I don't, then you got me here on the record being like, oh, well, then, this bitch thinks that he could have done better, but like he can't. You know what I mean? So maybe it's just one of those, we should just leave it in the history books. How about that too?
Yes, it's unfilmable.
There you go.
Unadaptable. There you go. At least it gave us some good Queen moments between Vanessa Redgrave and Glenda Jackson. So at least we have that.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's another nomination for Vanessa Redgrave where I'm like, decent work, not anywhere near win-worthy. So
no. I mean,
yeah,
I think she's good by the end, but it's not. But like, to have a nomination, You kind of scratch your head there. You
Yeah.
know?
I have other alternatives that I will maybe mention later.
Me too.
All right. Well, I think it's time to move on to our final losing nominee, Janet Suzman in Nicholas and Alexandra.
Okay.
Moving on to another royal property here. So, Janet Suzman is our only one and done nominee of the group. She was born in South Africa, and she eventually made her way to the Royal Shakespeare Company on the stage, and she was in a number of British TV productions, heavy dramatic parts, obviously Shakespeare production. She did Hedda Gabler, St. Joan, just big heavyweight stuff there. But as far as film, moviegoers in 1971 had not seen Janet Suzman, at least on the big screen, before Nicholas and Alexandra. But I was reading that it's technically not her feature film debut in terms of production. She made another film before this, but it came out after Nicholas and Alexandra. But essentially, this is her debut in America, around the world, in film, Nicholas and Alexandra, because of release schedule. So I'm going to count it as a feature film debut. So there you go. I was reading a number of bigger names, just like in Mary Queen of Scots, were in the mix, like Katharine Hepburn and Vanessa Redgrave. Even Elizabeth Taylor was in the mix.
That's interesting.
But yes, but they decided to go with lesser known names for the leads, mostly because pre-production was such a mess that they couldn't afford big names. So they went with Janet Suzman and Michael Jaston, who was also very new to film. So, alrighty, let's strap in and talk about Nicholas and Alexandra. So it's about Tsar Nicholas, the last Russian Tsar in the early 1900s in Russia, and his wife, Alexandra, who has just given birth to their first son. And as Nicholas is dealing with the state affairs and everything, Alexandra is just attending to her queen duty stuff, and also their son is diagnosed with hemophilia, so she turns to this self-proclaimed spiritual healer, Rasputin, who worms his way into her life and has a very powerful influence over her. And that is largely what Janet Suzman has to do until things kind of escalate, and with like Nicholas being forced to abdicate towards the end and things take a turn, obviously. But yes, big 3-hour epic, thousands of extras, huge period piece, and it's actually our only Best Picture nominee of this group. Thankfully, we don't have to run through everything here, just Janet's performance. But yes, thoughts on Miss Janet Suzman's performance here?
It is what it is.
Wow, powerful words.
It's not particularly memorable for me. Ian and I and we sat through 3 hours of it, Kevin.
Yeah,
this is the second time you've had to watch it, so I'm curious to hear what I know.
Second and last.
We were talking a little bit off mic about how like we have to go through 3-hour epics every now and then for these deep dives, especially in this era. And this is, again, like the previous film, this is a movie that is one of the last sort of films of its kind, these sort of 3-hour giant production pieces. And knowing that it had this massive production failure to the point in which they have to, like you said, get these lesser known actors because they don't have the money to pay stronger actors to elevate this material, because we see this all the time, right? You cover this, I cover this, everybody that's listening follows along to Oscar races of the past and Oscar history. These movies are mostly, at the time, they're pretty Wikipedia entry to begin with, but they're elevated by performances that can take them to the next level. Like they can take a movie and make them big, make them exciting, make us care for these characters, make them a sweeping epic. And this movie doesn't do any of that with these performances, because these performances are as dull as I've seen in a long time. And Janet Suzman, you mentioned 3 actresses. I would have said that any of the actresses also nominated in this category could have done well. A bunch of people that couldn't have done it. Like anybody really could have elevated this. Like in you're making a movie about the last Russian czar, and so it's got big historical implications. It feels kind of priorities are sort of peanuts by the end of this movie. It feels like her involvement in all of it feels kind of secondary. It feels very secondary.
Very much so. The
It
most of
feels
any of them here. Yeah.
very much so. Like,
Yeah.
there are long gaps in this movie where she's not even there, and I would say this is very borderline in terms of a lead performance. This is teetering on supporting. Just because also too her impact is very quiet. There's not, there's not really for me like a lot of connection to her as a character. And there's very serious things going on. Her country is falling apart. Her child is teetering on the verge of death, at all times.
Right.
Like that child, the healthcare plan back then. Good Lord. But
you need to put him in like a bubble.
A bubble. He's got to be a bubble kid. Like, I mean, but no, I think that this was, I love you and everything, but this was a grueling exercise to watch this one. This was not the last film I watched to cover for our watches today. And I did that on purpose because I had a feeling, when you just have that feeling of a 3-hour movie that's just not going to vibe with you. I know it vibes with some people. I know that people can appreciate this movie for what it is, but for me personally, exactly. Like, let them have it let them, whatever. But for me, this movie was very tedious. And it is why performances like Sunday Bloody Sunday, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Klute were the future of this category, or the future of the time, because they're more interesting, they're more thought-provoking. There's more things said within the subtext, and this movie has none of that. And it's very all on the nose, and it's also like weirdly put together too. The story itself there's no gradual progressions. It has an intermission, and you're kind of sitting there like, why? Like, like it's because momentum. Yeah, well, that's the only reason why.
That's it.
That is the only reason why. But yet there's no urgency to this movie. And when you have a movie about a crumbling empire, there needs to be urgency within the
you would think there would be.
There's not. It's as it's as dull as it could be. So yeah, it is what it is.
Yes. All I have to say is thank God I don't have to cover all that many details and storylines of this film, because I don't think I could take it.
They're not very interesting. They're not very interesting.
Right. I really have struggled through my first and now second viewings of this film. And I think, my biggest issue is that there's just such a lack of imagination in presenting this story in such a basic way without really having much of anything to say, really, when there should be. There should be a lot to say from this.
There should be.
And ultimately, it's once again another thing where I'm looking for a perspective that just isn't there. And there are just also so few memorable sequences, like so few moments that really come to life. And it's just too creaky is the word I would use for it, for me to really appreciate it. Yes, and like you said, I know it has its fans. I wish I could see what you see, the fans out there of this movie, because I struggle with it. Having said that, I think Janet Suzman is putting in solid work. For me, it's not a performance that is calling to be nominated by any means. And I also don't think that she quite has enough of a screen presence, to be quite frank, to make you fully invested in her performance. You can definitely feel a little bit of that stage-trained actress making her film debut coming into play here.
Maybe some nerves.
Maybe.
Feels like it.
I think so.
It feels like it. It feels like a giant weight is on her shoulders.
Yeah.
Especially if you would have told me, Kevin, if you would have told me, you're my agent here, right? If you would have told me this is technically your screen debut, you've been doing a lot of TV, a lot of stage work, okay? And all those actresses you mentioned couldn't get. So you are the equivalent of those actresses. Go and do it. I would be terrified.
Yeah.
I would be absolutely mortified, and it would show in my performance, and it definitely does. Like she feels like a
Hmm.
turtle in a shell at times. Like it's like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake, and like there's no risk, there's no elevation in it. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
I think she is being very careful with this performance, is how I would say it in a more maybe diplomatic way.
But I don't want her to
Um,
be careful. Like this shouldn't be a
yeah.
careful performance. You know what I mean? It should be a little heightened. It should be a
Yes.
little it should be a little like, hey, my kid's dying. Hey, my country's falling apart. Hey, my husband could be murdered at any second. Hey, this weird creepo is like using me as like a puppet on a string. I should be freaking crazy a little bit. You know what I mean? Like my
Hmm.
life is a little wild. And it should be
Yeah.
like to not to this tone, like me, because I'm nuts, but but it should be a little bit like that, other than just really, kind of here. It's very here. It's very like just even flat. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wish it was better. And yes, it has a lot to do with the what's on the page, but it
Hmm.
also has a lot to do with what she's bringing to that, because you know this as well as anyone. Great actors, great performances can elevate weak things on the page to a
Yes.
point in which we look past those and we say, well, they're given a lot. So
Hmm.
let's, there's also, it's weird. Like, where's the sense of urgency to have this be a nomination is the question. And why is this? And the only reason I can think as to why this movie gets the nominations it does is because it's what we talk about. It fills a slot for the Academy that they are comfortable in presenting, rather than going to something else that is better and more groundbreaking and just more deserving ultimately. It just reminds me of like when something like The Reader gets nominated and you sit there and you go like, of course that movie got nominated, because like they, they wouldn't think outside of their box for 5 minutes. They just penciled in this one and moved on. So
Hmm. Here's what I will say as a positive in her performance. I think, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this. I do think that she physically fits the part in terms of she has an elegance about her and a kind of regal quality, and she also has a bit of like a smug attitude, I find. Like in the beginning, of being like very comfortable with her life. This is before dealing with all this stuff with her son and everything, but kind of is fulfilling that sort of slot of being like the wife behind the great man, but also someone who doesn't have like big aspirations of being a ruler herself. So she
mhm.
wouldn't naturally have that much of a commanding presence ultimately. I think, yeah, the sort of first third or so of the film kind of indicates that she's going to have a stronger presence than she ultimately ends up having. So I remember just watching on this second watch in the beginning being like, okay, she's in a little bit more of this than I remember. She does have a certain physical queen quality to her that is like, yeah, this is not a bad performance necessarily, but I do sort of agree with you on the whole that it feels like a little bit of a half measure in a lot of her scenes, how she's approaching this. That is, yeah, you sort of are looking for that spark of big, high emotion, considering the stakes of this film, that she does not fill. And I don't think that
No,
her co star does either, to be quite honest. So it's not
no,
just her.
no. I can't agree with you there. She like, again, on paper,
Yeah.
they look like they fit the bill, right? They look
Yes.
kind of like that,
Yes.
but
Hmm.
then they have to talk. You know what I mean? Then they have to act, and it doesn't. Sometimes on paper it looks good, but it doesn't. And obviously, it's not like they could go back and replace them. They didn't have any money. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? They're just
Right.
kind of stuck with
Right.
what they had, and it worked for people back then. Just doesn't work. But you know what, Kevin? Maybe it'll work on the third go round when you watch it again next year. Just
Yes. My inevitable yearly watch of Nicholas and Alexandra.
I was just gonna say like that's never gonna happen. I don't think you'll ever watch this movie again.
I will never watch this movie unless I literally have to for a show.
I would, yeah.
Or for someone else's show. And if they did make me watch this again, I would be like, I politely decline.
I would never let you watch it. I
Thank
don't
you.
want to watch it again.
That's very nice of you.
No. Also, can I just say one thing about the film before we move on?
Sure.
Just one last thing, and I know it's going to be negative too, but the way this movie is lit is ridiculous. Like this is stupidly lit.
Mm-hmm.
This is a stupidly lit movie. My God, like when you and Zach were talking about it on your show, I was like, I don't know that'll be the case. You know what I mean? Like, some of these dramas that are, are like these, they're pretty well lit. You know what I mean? And then I watched it. I was like, good God, I was like, I needed sunglasses to watch this movie. It was ridiculous. And then you watch like McCabe Miss Miller, and you're like, oh my God, it's dark, but yet it's beautiful, and all this different thing, and the natural lighting,
poetic,
all that
and
yeah, exactly. And then you watch this, and you're like, good God, what an eyesore. So yeah, that's all I have to say. That's my last thought. Sorry.
Well, my last thought is that I do think that the final 30 to 40 minutes, I think, are the most interesting part of the film, actually, where they're actually having to face the fact that they are no longer able to be in the positions that they've been in for so long, and they have to abdicate and sort of live on their own. I think that feels like we're finally doing something there that is of interest. And I think she's sort of, even though we've been sort of negatively talking about how she doesn't have a lot of energy, to be quite honest, I think towards the end is where that lack of energy feels more fitting to me, because she is just like, I've lost my ability to rule. She has these like quieter scenes where she's just doesn't even seem to want to fight back anymore. She's just happy to be with her family. And I do think she has a kind of weary quality that works and does show the kind of passage of time. So, those last few scenes for her, I do think are where her performance feels a little more authentic to me. And I do think the final scene is actually finally something impactful, as we know from history what happens to this family. But a little disappointed with this nomination ultimately, especially with how long it is. It feels like there should be a lot to break down and discuss with this nomination and the arc of this character, but it does have that just flat, even tone through all those 3 hours that unfortunately I leave kind of feeling meh. Like, I don't think it's a bad performance. I'm just like, okay, next.
No, I totally agree. Though I will say, I agree with you. That ending it's quite shocking. It's memorable. It's like, damn, if only the other 2 hours and 59 minutes and 30 seconds were just like that.
Okay, I think it's time to move on to our big winner, Jane Fonda in Klute. What a thrill to finally be able to talk about Miss Jane Fonda in Klute, her first Oscar-winning performance, previous nominee for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And by the way, I just read her memoir last year, where she talks about how tumultuous her life was at this time. Yeah. Married to Roger Vadim, getting involved in these political causes, the Vietnam War. She's really sort of using her celebrity to fight for her causes. And what's fascinating is that Klute is a movie that she felt nervous about being in. She was concerned that it wouldn't be politically correct to play a call girl. And she wanted Faye Dunaway to do it.
She's like, here you go, Faye.
She's like,
you know what, right Faye, in front of the train.
Basically, yeah. Yes. She's like, you can do it. You can play a call girl. That's not me, but you could do it. Absolutely.
Imagine telling your friend, yeah, you look like the call girl type. You know what I mean?
Yes. Right.
Like, what?
In her defense, she said that the reason that she thought Faye could do it is that she felt like Faye has lived a life that is,
it's much different than her.
Very complicated. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. But anyway, she ultimately does agree to do it. And she really immerses herself in research. She spoke with, sex workers, all the while attending to what she was involved with politically, which to me makes the quality of her performance even more impressive. Not to go too ahead of time for my own thoughts, but yes, Klute, it's an Alan J. Pakula production. So it's a neo-noir film thriller. It's about a detective, Klute, played by Donald Sutherland, who investigates the disappearance of an executive, which leads him to a call girl, Brie Daniels, played by Jane Fonda, who is feeling increasingly paranoid. So, in exchange for protecting her, she agrees to help him with his case. So, let's talk about our winner, Miss Jane Fonda. Thoughts on the legendary Jane Fonda and her first Oscar-winning performance?
There's so much to talk about with Jane Fonda
Yeah.
from just this year, this
Mm-hmm.
performance. I don't know where to begin. It's a lot. I will say this, just speaking on Jane Fonda as a whole, she is a legend. I love Jane Fonda with my whole heart and soul. When she was announced recently that she was diagnosed with cancer, it like broke me. I think it broke most of us, but like it was
Yeah,
just like
absolutely.
it was just like sitting there in it. I was like, oh my god, no. And then when like they found out, that she's in remission and everything, I was so relieved because
She's a fighter. Yeah.
she is a fighter. I think she is an example for all of us. She really is. I know we throw the word and phrase "nepo baby" around a lot, but I think you can take that and throw that in the trash, burn it, and then protest about burning it. In the trash, with Jane Fonda, because she's someone that, if you're going to be famous and if you're going to be someone that comes from one of the most famous names in Hollywood history, Fonda, you need to back it up. And honestly, for me, when I think of the last name Fonda, I think of Jane. I think of what she's done on the screen, on the stage. I think of her cultural impact. I continue to see that she is out there being the activist that she is for climate change, obviously for women during the Me Too movement. I thought her speech a couple of years ago for the Cecil B. DeMille Award was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. She is such a pro. She's hilarious. She's still got a fight, like you mentioned, Kevin, but a spirit to her that is unmatched like anyone else. And for the love of God, she is a movie star. She is a
Mm-hmm.
movie star. When you put her on the screen, even today, yes, I know she's in like 80 for Brady and she's like in book club and she's in all these and she's on television shows and all these different things, but like she just elevates those things because she's Jane fucking Fonda. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so 1971
Mm.
is a perfect thing to talk about because there's all these movies that are released within this year. But I don't think that there was a bigger person in 1971 than Jane Fonda. I honestly don't believe that. I think that when her win is so unique because the entire world knew it was going to happen and they were waiting for that speech. You could hear a pin drop when you watch that clip. There were boos, there were
Yes.
cheers. It is an entire world, not just a nation, a world waiting to figure out what she's going to say
Mm-hmm.
because she wasn't afraid to say things that were on her mind. She wasn't afraid to fight for things and for people that needed fighting for. And that sense of commitment and vulnerability and openness is exactly why her performance in Clute is so unique and is so spectacular. It is doing a lot while not, within a movie that doesn't say a lot, like say a lot in terms of dialogue. It says a lot in
Mm.
terms of looks. It says a lot in terms of motion. And a lot in terms of just living through paranoia and trauma. And I think that that's why Brie as a character is so fascinating. She is struggling to try to be an actress, and yet she is drawn into this professionalism, of being a call girl. She wants to be taken serious in something. I found that to be really fascinating because you damn well know Jane Fonda had to be going to auditions for her entire life, early in her life, having to convince every single person that she was worth being on the screen, just like her father, just like her family legacy would suggest. And she had to fight that. And that's why when you said that about Faye Dunaway and you said that about, and then I read that, I was like, no, but you have a lot in common with this character, not from being a sex worker, but from being someone that has to prove themselves, and also that someone that is deeply afraid within the profession in which they are very successful in. And that's exactly what is going on right now in 1971 for her. And so I think she's so captivating. It's a deeply, like you're saying, committed performance. I think of just so many moments where it's just little things. It's a look. It's her grabbing Donald Sutherland's hand while they're getting fruit at the market. It's the conversations to the therapist that, whether they were written on the page or whether they were improvised and written by Fonda, are completely devastating. Bakula is another director from the 1970s that I think is vastly underrated. We talked about All the President's Men, sort of a capper of this trilogy with like Parallax View and Klute and All the President's Men, his Paranoia trilogy, unofficially titled. And I think that this is a special movie. And Sutherland's great, but he's kind of in there for a little bit and you're with him, but then she comes on the screen. She's in this movie. When she's there, you can't keep your eyes off it. It's a tantalizing performance.
It really is. I adore this performance.
Me too.
I find her to be so incredibly captivating. And I love that the Oscars rewarded her for it. Even, this being like a thriller type of film rather than like a straight traditional drama, But she really gets so much to do, and it plays to pretty much every single one of her strengths as an actress and as a person. She gets to be steely, she gets to be very, kind of nervous and anxious and flirty and wise beyond her years. And I love how much she and also the film really treat this character of Bree with respect, but also don't try to sort of clean her up and like make her into a saint. She's very flawed and she's impulsive and she's stuck in a rut and she's just sort of trying to get by. And there's this very like leave me alone and let me be quality that feels very New York. So like it's very specific. I find.
Let me do my business. Let me go through the day-to-day life. Stop following me around, Mr. Cop Man.
Right. And like also I can take care of myself.
Bingo.
At the same time, until she finds that she kind of can't. But yeah, we're seeing how so much of her life is defined by how she presents herself to other people and how they perceive her. And that's what makes those therapy sessions so powerful, because she is just exposing all of her anxiety, her fears, and her feeling like she won't be able to change, even though she wants to. And it just feels like very exposing in a way that I don't know if a lot of actors of any gender would feel comfortable with, but she fully understands this character, and she is just so relaxed and confident in herself, but also knowing exactly what to say to like please her clients, flattering them, and just sort of adapting on the fly, sort of depending on what they are wanting from her. And she's obviously like, as a call girl, very good at what she does, but she also has that extra something at the same time that would make you understand why she is a special person who would become like someone's obsession, right? Even if she doesn't obviously warrant that. She doesn't warrant what happens to her by any means, but she's also like clearly someone special. You could see why people would be so drawn to her.
Yes. I mean, men are drawn to her because of obviously the profession, but also there's, like you're saying, Kevin, there's something else underneath. There's a mystery to her. There's a reason why kind of Klute starts off just as sort of regular, but then he falls for her,
Totally.
Because of the fact that she is very comfortable. She at least portrays herself to be very comfortable, yet she is very vulnerable. We're all
Mm-hmm.
very vulnerable, you know. And it's not even about like somebody trying to kill her necessarily. It's just like she lives a very hard life. And what Fonda's able to do is like show how hard it is, like show how easy it may feel like for us to think, but it's not easy to get rejected job after job. It's not easy to be have your looks put up under a microscope and then examined, and then like have a casting director just kind of walk by and say, no, that's not, no, we've seen that before, no thank you. It is a very personal role. It's very
Mm-hmm.
personal. And so a lot of this stuff, like, it's, you can tell why. I mean, Jane Fonda at the time and even still now is one of the more beautiful people to have ever graced the screen. But there is, through celebrity or through, in Bree's case, someone that is intentionally in a job profession where desire is something that is put with a price point and something that needs to be attained for the client to connect with. She has a lot of baggage that you have to still unpack. As an actress, too, she has a lot under there that she's trying to unpack. And I think she's doing it in a performance that is so unique because, like, it's one thing for you to play the madam in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. It's another thing for you to play a call girl in a modern time where she is lost within herself as to what she really wants to be. And she's not really sure where she wants to go. And that uncertainty is also her strength. She's fiery, a little prickly, you know, standoffish, all these different things. But yet she's unique. And like moths to a flame, we're drawn into her. And then once we comfortably sit in there with her, we realize she's not the manic pixie dream girl idea that when you try to purchase someone in their time for when they are a call girl and you're trying to, do that. There's more to that. They're human beings. And underneath all that, Klute is able to find, at least for me, find that Bree is someone that wants, like you said, to be alone, but wants to be safe, but wants to also, it's not really about being successful. It's about not being afraid anymore of what's coming around the corner, being able to just walk down the street, being able to ask a question to somebody, to, somebody walk up with them and not have eyes on them. It's a very feminist
Yeah.
performance. Only I think somebody like, and a couple of actresses could do it, but Jane fits so perfectly in it because of the fact that she's lived through all that. There is that
Mm-hmm.
baggage that's added to it. So it's almost as if like when people were trying to reward this performance, which is, like you're mentioning, Kevin, very unconventional. When you're watching it, it's a very unconventional win. But
Yeah.
then when you get under the surface of it, you understand why it got under people's skin. You understand why people got affected with it, because at a certain point, Bree goes away and you're looking at Jane. And I don't say that a lot because I don't think actors do that a lot. I don't think they put themselves nearly as much, like they put themselves in the process of makeup and wigs and all these different kind of changes to fit maybe a larger than life figure, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
put themselves first into the performance. And the
Right.
deeply researched minutia of all of this comes into this performance that it's not very loud. It's not a very bombastic performance. You don't see her yelling and screaming and everything. It's
Yeah.
all internalized and
Yeah.
kept in there. And
Mm-hmm.
um and I think that that's what makes it so special. It's like, you know that this person's not okay, and they're trying
Mm-hmm.
so hard to keep it together and be the coolest person in the room. The shot of the movie for me that breaks my heart is when she's in that nightclub and she's sitting right below Roy Schneider there, and
Yep.
just that's She hates that she has to be here. It's killing her. Her soul is crushed being at the spot. But that's where right then in that moment she feels safe. Then of course when they break in, like when her and Klute come back from the market or whatever, and then the people have broken in trying to find the tapes or trying to find her or whatnot. There's that moment there too where it goes back to her. She's on that same level of fear. And I'm in awe of this performance. I mean, like when I was rewatching, I was just kind of like, I'm so happy that the Academy recognized this.
Definitely. Yeah. Going back to that scene where she's with Roy Scheider and she has that very complex look on her face. The next scene after that, we get the therapy session of her where she is saying, I think you're seeing how much that interaction with the woman that she used to work with, who is now just like hopelessly addicted to drugs, how much that kind of shook her up and made her think that that could have been her. And I love how much she adds in those kind of pauses when we see her thinking about how it is that she really feels. And she sort of lands on this idea that she would rather be faceless and be left alone, which is really, really impactful. And, if that is improv on her part, the fact that she is coming up with that and sort of landing on that and then being able to portray that feeling at the same time is like really working on many different levels. And there's another session that she has that I think is really incredible where she's talking about spending time with Klute and like having sex with him, and yet she feels this need to push him away. And to sort of break it off, which is just an incredible scene where she really seems to be working it out in the moment and trying to verbalize her very conflicting emotions. And it's like, you don't know what she's going to say next. You don't know what she's going to land on next, but you're riveted because she is so in control of this character that there's never a second where you don't believe her as this person, at least for me.
Well, no. And then it all kind of culminates with that final conversation.
Yeah.
Where she's like, you're talking about all those scenes are perfect, but then it all comes together with the overarching theme by the end of the film where she's talking about where she's at now. She's, we see her walking out with Klute and they're going to potentially try to see if it can work beyond just this incident. But then she tells the therapist, like, you can see me here next week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we get the contradiction maybe of that with the because that's basically implying like this is probably not going to work out. You know what I mean? In a joking manner. But then the contradiction of that where the client calls and says, oh, I'm going away. I'm not coming back for a while. But even there's the idea of a while. That means that's temporarily means that you're not going to be here a little bit, but you could return. So it's always this idea of that she's chasing after a life that she wants to have away from where she currently is. But because of her survival instincts, because of the way that she's lived this life for such a long time, she's realistic enough to understand she could potentially be back here at any moment. And she doesn't want to get hurt. So she's a realist and she has to be real to herself. And it's heartbreaking because all she wants to do is live peacefully away from all this stuff. And yet she has continuously having to hedge bets emotionally. And I just think that the final moments are heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And I watch this movie and I don't understand why it's called Klute. Because really it's not even like about him.
It's not fully not. Yeah.
No. And
it should be called Brie.
It should be called Brie, or just called something else because because it has nothing really to do with him. Like John Klute,
Donald Sutherland, very generous king.
Very generous.
Same thing with Mary Tyler Moore in Ordinary People, just sort of letting her shine.
Or
Julie Christie in Don't Look Now.
Yeah. He's just like, very gracious scene partner. Donald Sutherland. Still great in the film. It's not a
Oh yeah.
slap against him. He's very good. He's a very good actor, but yes, he doesn't overtake scenes, and he doesn't try to, even though it's technically his movie on titular wise, it's not really his movie, and he understands that,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that.
Hmm.
Because yeah, we once again, kind of capping them off at the end of these reviews here, we're left with her and her lasting impression rather than the male's perspective,
Yeah.
right? And that's what is truly impactful by the end. It suggests that yes, this movie is called Klute, but it ain't about Klute.
Yeah, it's an incredible ending. Just to mention the big climactic scene where the killer reveals how he killed the girl that she used to work with, and that unbroken take there as she's listening and is like stunned into silence there, and the tears are in her eyes, and she even has like a runny nose. Yeah, really just bracing stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, all the way to that bittersweet ending. It's a beautifully calibrated performance. So let's transition into why she won the Oscar. For the precursors, she won the Golden Globe for drama. She won the New York Film Critics Award for Best Actor. She won National Society of Film Critics as well. Glenda Jackson won at BAFTA. So good for her for Sunday Bloody Sunday. That might have been after, I'm not sure, but either way, I think it does indicate that the Brits were behind Miss Glenda Jackson in this case, once again. So the campaign itself was kind of messy, I would say. Jane Fonda was very open about saying she didn't care about awards, that she only wanted to focus on her activism. And Vanessa Redgrave apparently couldn't even come to the Oscars or the United States because of like visa issues, which may or may not be related to her own activism. And Janet Suzman, I guess, did a lot of interviews, but apparently she said that Nicholas and Alexandra was too long, and she was like complaining about her own movie. So that's always fun. But yeah, only Janet Suzman and Jane Fonda ended up going to the awards. Only 2 out of 5 of the Best Actors nominees are represented. It is the 70s. That is how it's going to go for this decade. Very different from how it is now.
Yeah.
But yes, let's talk about why we think Jane Fonda was our big winner. I think we kind of, you were sort of talking about the context of Jane Fonda in 1971 already, but any thoughts on why Academy members thought that she was the best of this group?
It was the most talked about performance and the most talked about performer of the year. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you watch the film too, like we mentioned, it's an undeniable performance. It's also very modern too, for the times, the shift that we are getting into the 70s. It's an actress too, also, that is on the rise, second nomination, so it's not particularly surprising that it happens either, because she had it's kind of like how we, the young ingenue sort of thing, right? With that we always talk about, where like they get in the door with one nomination, and then a couple of years later right. This is your welcome to the club, and then the next time you get in,
now let's see you prove it, in your follow-up. And then she did, and then some.
Exactly. Probably when Golden Globe mattered more. Probably when those critics awards probably mattered more. But honestly, I think she wins because, one, it does help that she's the only American there. I think too that kind of helps. Not saying that there's bias there. I'm just saying that I don't. It think
worked for Marissa Tomei.
Hey. I don't think it hurts that at the time the Fondas had never won an Oscar.
That's true.
And so there is a bit of like Hollywood royalty and wanting to kind of like award her father a little bit there too. But then there's also like the new age Academy voters that would want to vote for her because they like Jane. She is very popular. She is very, people do love her. She is outspoken. But who cares? Some people don't give a shit about that. And sometimes the performance speaks for itself. It's pretty, unanimous. Like Nicholas and Alexandra, that was not going to win. You know what I mean? And you start breaking it down, like Sunday Bloody Sunday was not, doesn't get in Best Picture. It gets those nominations. But is that probably a more controversial film at the time than Klute? Which is
she just won the year before.
She just won the year before, so that's probably not going to happen. Vanessa Redgrave, talk about somebody that was like blacklisted essentially at the
Yeah.
time by Richard Nixon, and couldn't even go
Mhm.
to the Oscars. Very British film. Didn't really get a lot of other nominations. You know what I mean? Wasn't like perceived really strong. And then you look at
And
McCabe
also kind of overshadowed in her own film.
Yep, by somebody else that's
So,
nominated in the category.
right.
And
Yeah.
then like McCabe Miss Miller,
Yeah.
that's the only nomination for that movie. And it's almost just like, it's so random. It's great that
Yeah.
nomination exists, but it's so random. No one could have
Yeah.
expected it. So by kind of process of elimination too, if you want to play that, that's how she wins as well. And then
Yeah.
also, even more than like Last Picture Show and French Connection, like Fonda's talked about so much in the press and talked about so much that you probably can't help yourself but go and watch it. The movie was a decent hit. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so, that sort of neo-noir style also helps too. Paranoid thrillers of the time helps as well. So overall, you kind of add it all up. The mystique, I think, helped her. And then I guarantee you some people might have voted for her just to see what a speech would be like. And then there's the controversy around that, in that her father had to go to her and tell her to not say anything, right?
Tone it down. Right. Yeah.
Tone it down. You know what I mean? And to which I still think her Oscar speech is perfect, because it's not
It's actually
thank
kind of
you
funny.
and walk off. It's actually,
Yeah.
There's a lot to say, but now it's not the time to say it. And then
Yes.
he says it the next couple of years with her actions rather than the words on that stage, which is perfect. That is perfect. So I don't really think that it was. I don't think that there was an alternative really at much.
Yeah. I don't think it was
anything.
close.
I don't think it was close. I think she walked away.
Yeah.
I think she walked away with it.
I agree completely. Yeah, very well known. She's the only American. And I think there's also just a kind of intensity to her performance that I could actually see appealing to both men and women in the Academy. It is a very feminist kind of film. And there's also just like that almost method intensity that I feel like especially male actors tend to favor. So I think, it's just easily the biggest showcase role ultimately between the five, even when you have people playing real life royalty in the mix. It's like Brie is just, this character is such the most fascinating character in the bunch. So it's just the perfect storm, one of those perfect storm moments that comes together where there was no alternative, like there was no one coming close to Jane Fonda. So it is ultimately a predictable win, but one that is incredibly deserving and one of my favorites in Best Actress history.
No, for sure.
So,
it is a top tier Best Actress performance, for sure.
Yep. We have a lot of questions to get to.
Oh boy.
So we will go through those as quickly as possible, but still giving our thoughtful answers. All right, let's start with Fritz. Fritz says, gays, queens, prostitutes. Is this the most caught between past and present lineup yet? Well, first of all, gays, queens, and prostitutes. Welcome to And the Runner-Up Is.
I was like the alternate title of the show.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I think so. I so far in your series, absolutely. It really
feels
is.
Like,
yeah.
Feels like a wrestling between the old and the new guard.
It seems like this year is like we are confused as to what we want to be.
There's not a cohesive message here.
We've got I think they've got one foot completely in one pond, and then the other one is like the foot's halfway out, because you still have Nicholas and Alexandra and Mary Queen of Scots, but like the other foot is deeply in, because these three films don't really mesh with those other performances that are in those more period standard films. Yeah.
Christopher Perkins said, Barbara Streisand says she was offered the role of Brie in Klute. Would she have bodied this part or nah?
I don't think that would have worked, honestly.
I think it would look very different. And it would be feels like almost a different kind of movie.
Yeah. Could
she have pulled it off? Maybe some version of that. I do think she is very talented, obviously, but I'm glad things worked out the way they did.
I
I'll
think
say that.
I think the personal and the personality would have been
Yeah.
completely different. Like I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
like Jane's dedication to the role, that would
Mm-hmm.
be lost. But it would have been fascinating.
Perhaps.
But I just don't know. And I love Barbara, but like I just don't know if
Yeah.
she could do this. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, Japes said recast Klute with an against type 70s actress.
Against type?
Yes.
I mean, Faye would have been really good, honestly.
I mean, that feels like regular type, not
Yeah,
really
I
against
know.
type.
I'm just trying
Sorry.
to. I know. No, I know.
I thought of a fun one in terms of
Okay.
super against type.
Mm.
And maybe they would have to change a few things about the story, but I thought of Julie Andrews.
I would. Yeah. Well, you know what? Yeah, actually, that would make sense because of
Yeah,
the movies since she kind of makes on later with Blake Edwards and stuff like that. Like we didn't really
exactly.
know that at that time. I mean, we're what like at this still period. We're like, oh, she's Maria and she's
Right. She's like the perfect
she's Mary
angel,
Poppins.
right?
You
Right,
know?
yeah. Yeah. She's
Yeah,
here to
that would
save
have
us
worked.
all, and yeah. I
Yeah.
think that would be really fun, like left turn for her.
Yeah, maybe Barbara would have been out of Left Turn. I wouldn't think of Barbara Streisand doing a role like Klute. Like that
Yeah.
is, and like to consider her, that would kind of be against type. I don't think because I wouldn't see her being this vulnerable
No.
and I don't think she really is in until maybe later in her career.
Fritz said, what would happen if Streisand or Dunaway had done Klute? People would have been weird, I think, about Barbara doing it. There would have been a lot of discourse if Barbara Streisand is in that role.
Mm.
If Faye Dunaway does it, I think she wins the Oscar.
Yeah,
I really do.
I think she wins an Oscar early in her career, just like Jane.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Because I do think they are similar types in terms of intensity and sort of method quality that I think, she would have done a pretty good job. Maybe not as good as Jane, but yeah. Chels says, Jane is a foundational Oscar-winning hot girl, and Klute breaks the tired hooker with a heart of gold trope. Do you think she'd win the Oscar today for this role, or do we think it'd go down the route of Gone Girl, Promising Young Woman / the Academy doesn't award dark women?
That's a good question. I think that those movies are completely different than the kind of vibe that this movie's giving off. Those movies they've got a cheekiness to it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And more of a fun quality.
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. Yeah, they're winking at the audience. This isn't. So I think that the Academy could have embraced something like this because it is more serious and it is more introspective. But then again, I also think too, like, is it too introspective? You know what I mean? Is it too? Is it not showy enough? Because nowadays, like showy makeup performances win a lot more than.
Yeah.
Like I know we just recently had Frances win for sort of a quieter performance in 2020, but like that's because the movie won Best Picture. And I mean, that gets into the discussion of like, would Klute have been nominated for Best Picture if it got in the 10? Probably, you know what I mean? So maybe we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think she would have had a good shot.
Yeah. I do think what's also important is that we have sympathy for Brie more so maybe than like
Amy
and Gone Girl or Cassie and Promising Young Woman. I think there's just more of a sympathy on, like, you're more on her side, perhaps.
Yeah. It's a much more balanced and I think a little bit more of a nuanced character than those performances.
Sure.
But maybe that's just me.
Yes. Which are more heightened.
Yeah.
Intentionally, but still.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Ruth Evat said, in Klute, how unscripted were the scenes with the therapist? If largely unscripted, they are the work of an actress who knows her character inside out. Yes, largely unscripted. Apparently they went on for super long takes, like 90-minute sessions of just fully her going off on all different directions, and they only used the best parts of them.
Can we get that on the Criterion or maybe on a 4K release?
We need the raw,
I want the raw 90 minutes.
Jane Fonda.
Holy hell. Yep. That's just as good as the movie. God.
Yeah. Lila said, which is the definitive Jane Fonda hairstyle? They shoot horses, Klute, or coming home?
Hairstyle.
I think Klute. When I think of Jane Fonda, I think of that hairstyle. Yeah. And I also think of her mugshot with the same hairstyle.
Yeah, pretty iconic.
Yeah.
Pretty iconic hairstyle there.
I mean, we know her now just as for like a bit more of like the coming home that she would kind of carry on.
Yeah, that's like kind of her what we know her for, but like
nowadays, right?
Nowadays, but like when I think of Jane Fonda, I think of how she looks in Klute. I think
like
of
the
like
rebel.
Yeah, I think of like the me versus the establishment kind of look.
Precisely. Yes.
That she's going for.
Yeah. Corey Zimmerman said, does Fonda's win here cap off the best 5 actress winning streak up to that point in Academy history, starting with the Hepburn-Streisand tie in 68? Or does 49 to 53 or some other streak beat it?
Ooh. Look this up in the moment. Kevin, if you want to respond.
Yeah, I think both are pretty iconic stretches. I might give the slight edge to 49 to 53, which, to remind people, is Olivia de Havilland in The Heiress, Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday, Vivian Leigh in Streetcar Named Desire, Shirley Booth in Come Back Little Sheba, and Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday. I think that's a really fantastic 5 there. I think this is a great 5. Speaking to Hepburn, Streisand, Maggie Smith, Glenda Jackson, Jane Fonda. I'd also throw in Liza Minnelli the next year is another great one. So
yeah, I would go with 67 through now, and even to Liza. Yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of Vivian Leigh. I know that's blasphemy.
You're one of those people.
I'm one of those people. I'm sorry. But no, I just think all these performances are truly great. I mean,
yeah, I get it.
The tie, and then which is really iconic too. That kind of helps that streak as well. And then I think Maggie Smith's performance is really wonderful. And obviously, A Woman in Love, Glenda Jackson, incredible performance, and this is another incredible performance too. And then like Liza just giving it all out in Cabaret. So yeah, I would say right now.
Miles McHale said, would Klute be equally memorable if it was called Brie Daniels?
It would be iconically remembered if it was Brie. It would be correctly remembered if it was called Brie Daniels or just Brie. You know?
Although there is something about the word Klute.
It is a very catchy word. Like you want to watch Klute. What is like when you find out that it's just Donald Sutherland's name, it's a little bit of a drag. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's not her.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's when you're like Klute. What is that about? Like it almost. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but like when you hear a title like Tenet, you're like, what the hell does that even mean? So you know what I mean?
Right.
So
yeah.
But yeah.
Sophia Simonello.
Who
says?
Oh,
yes, her. Julie Christie is the only actor in Altman's filmography nominated in a lead category. The other 5 actresses nominated from his movies were all in supporting. Does she belong in supporting like Altman's other nominees? If she's in supporting, do you give her the win over Leachman?
One, I wouldn't, because Clorence Leachman in The Last Picture Show is incredible. And I don't think she's supporting. And maybe that's a controversial take. Maybe some people think that that's controversial, but I think I stated my case why I think she's just as important, and it's a co-lead performance.
Yeah.
It's a damn shame she's the only Altman lead actress. Like Shelley Duvall or Sissy Spacek from Three Women should easily be in this conversation. Even Shelley, like I love Shelley Duvall in Popeye, but not many people like that movie. But like Shelley Duvall robbed of many Oscar nominations in Robert Altman movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't move her category. I think she's perfectly right where she's supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't think she's supporting. It may be more McCabe's story. Sometimes it feels that way, but I think Mrs. Miller is like a huge part of the success of the film. So, yeah, if she was supporting, though, I'd still give it to Cloris Leachman. All right. Dark Shaka said, why did the Academy take a couple years to grant Christie a second nomination? Didn't she deserve more Afterglow noms?
We talked about it. I don't know.
Did.
There was a disconnect between BAFTA and the Academy. And then she takes another 26 years. So if you think this is long, you wait until the next time you talk about it, Kevin. But
revisit Julie Christie in middle age.
Exactly. Yes. I think Julie Christie would probably be an actress nowadays that would have a much easier time getting nominated. Much kind of like Olivia Colman. Almost in a sense too, where she, where she gets that one win, and then now Coleman's getting nominated almost every other year, it feels like. And Christie, I think, would totally be that. I think also it just the system now benefits somebody like Julie Christie more in a modern lens. But back then, I don't know. I don't know the disconnect as to why. Then it feels super weird that she gets in for this with nothing else really attached to her. So it's a wild ride if you're Julie Christie at this point in your career. But I'm glad that they did again nominate it because it's such a unique performance.
I don't know if it's anything against her necessarily. Like, do I think that the Academy had something against Jessica Chastain in the 9 years that they weren't nominating her until Tammy Faye? Not particularly. I think it's just like the right role at the right time and luck, really, and like the types of contenders in the race. So I don't think there's like an explicit reason why they're like, we're not going to nominate Julie Christie.
Yeah. I do also think that it did help maybe that she was working with Altman coming off of MASH and and everything too. So that helps, and those other films might have also just like they're good performances, but they're nothing really different than what she's been doing. It's weird. We do weird rules for certain people that we don't apply to others. It's maddening. But that's what
welcome to the Oscars.
Welcome to the Oscars. Welcome to the Best Actress race, everyone.
Yes. Fritz said, would Julie have won in supporting? Again, I kind of don't think so. I think Cloris Leachman still wins, even if Julie's there.
Would you? Okay. Leachman's got a lot of time in that movie, too. You kind of could make a case.
It's not really about her.
No, it's not really about her, but,
So that's why I think I'm fine with her in supporting.
That's why I think I'm fine. Yeah, I recently watched the film and wonderful film. There's just a lot of time that you do spend with her individually also in that movie too. But it's a true ensemble piece. There's no lead really, I think, in that film. But no, I don't think I think Cloris Leachman would have beat her.
Joey Gentili
who
has something to say.
Oh,
yes.
Well, when doesn't she?
She's got a lot on her mind. All right. How does Julie Christie have the worst resume of Oscar nominations where she does absolutely nothing? Unlike her best performance in Finding Neverland, where she actually has range and only BAFTA saw it. I don't understand the question and I won't respond to it.
She's got a better resume than other actresses that have been nominated multiple times, and she's a great actress. Finding Neverland being her, is he saying his Finding Neverland's her best performance ever?
That seems to be the assertion, yes.
False.
Moving on.
You can leave that long pause in there too. False. That's all it needs to be
intend
said.
to. Yes.
Yes.
Sammy Flowers said, Glenda Jackson and homoeroticism in her films. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, Glenda. What's going on, girl? Come on, let's talk about
pattern.
It. Yeah. Got something on the mind? Want to talk about it?
I mean, all I could say is that, because of the Hays Code being abolished, because of the kind of free love happening at this time, there was, I think, this added interest in different forms of sexuality and love and all that. So there was an uptick in stories about, with homoerotic themes. And I think Glenda Jackson, as a very new school kind of actor, would naturally be drawn to, films that are tackling themes that haven't been seen as much in film. So that's what I would say for that.
Also use your power of winning an Oscar to making other projects that are more daring and push you as an actress and then push an audience. Oh my God. If only we did that nowadays. You know what I mean? I think that's great for her to do.
Andrew Carden said, not exactly a Best Actress question, but why do you think Sunday Bloody Sunday missed in picture when it had noms in director, screenplay, and both lead acting fields? Here's what I'll say. I think it would be easy to sort of use the excuse of it's too daring. But I feel like that's hard to say when you have A Clockwork Orange in the Best Picture lineup.
Right.
So maybe it's a box office thing. Maybe certain members just couldn't bring themselves to vote for a movie that is so openly queer, I think it could be a number of things.
I think it's that. I think And Fiddler on the Roof was a big success. Last Picture Show's pretty well loved across the board. French Connection as well. And then Nicholas and Alexandra, we talked about that. It's very much like the safe pick. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where really Sunday Bloody Sunday gets kind of kicked out, is because like Clockwork Orange, it's nominated in director, and it's like, okay, that's sort of kind of the movie that they want to champion, something different and edgy. And again, it's this tug and pull of the time of like, I give you Clockwork Orange, but we're going to take Nicholas and Alexandra, almost, it feels like. And
yeah.
But then it's like, but yeah, it is weird that it's not in the lineup. But the outlier, I think, would be Nicholas and Alexandra. But there's still a contingent of the Academy that's still, like today, like we talk about it today, people like movies about Hollywood or the Dad movie or whatever. There's they have their certain things or certain films in an era that they cling themselves to until it's completely dead. So,
yeah. And then even sometimes past the point of being dead.
Yeah, and it's like, come on, stop it. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But still getting those I won't undercut the fact that even though it doesn't get nominated for Best Picture, all those nominations are great for that movie. Because then it does show still, even though it didn't get the Best Picture love, people saw it, they appreciated it, and it was widely seen.
Kyle Crocodile said,
love the name.
Yes. Should Glenda have been a 2-time nominee this year with Sunday Bloody Sunday and Mary Queen of Scots, which is a superior performance?
Has she been nominated in supporting?
That's the thing, because I feel like Glenda, honestly, given her screen time, I would be perfectly fine with her also being in lead for Mary Queen of Scots with the amount she has to do.
I mean, I wouldn't kick out. I know I would kick out Janet Suzman, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, sure, she can be in there, and Suzman could be out, or Vanessa Redgrave could be out.
I mean, if such a thing was allowed and she could get in for 2 performances, like 2 of the 5 slots are Glenda Jackson, then sure, why not?
I'm okay with it.
I do think if this came out in 2023, she is 1000% being campaigned and supporting. Just like Margot Robbie was.
Just like Margot Robbie. I was going to say, she is going to get pushed in supporting for sure.
But I think Sunday Bloody Sunday is her better performance, personally speaking.
And it's also the performance I would want her to be nominated for more than I would want.
Exactly.
Scots. Yeah.
Japes said, what if Redgrave and Jackson played opposite roles in Mary Queen of Scots? Honestly, I don't think that would have worked. Sorry.
No. Doesn't fit their styles.
Yeah. That's a little too against type to bring against type back into it.
Yeah.
Zeta Short said, do Vanessa Redgrave and Timothy Dalton have believable chemistry in Mary Queen of Scots?
No.
Even though they do have quite an affair after this movie.
Oh yeah, sure. Off screen for sure, but not on screen.
Off screen, yeah.
I
think he has more on screen chemistry with Ian Holm.
Hell yeah! Can we have that movie, please? My God, they were.
Yeah.
I was like, just kiss already. Good Lord.
I know, right?
Ian Holm really good in that movie too. He's actually really good.
He is good. I would not have minded a supporting nomination for that.
Shame he was, and he was also in Nicholas and Alexandra. He was
in all the royal films that year.
He was checking out boxes.
Existential Rock said, who were the better Mary and Elizabeth? Ronan versus Redgrave, Robbie versus Jackson. And then also Sammy Flowers asked which pair in general was better.
I think Jackson was better than Margot Robbie.
I agree.
I think that I probably get the edge to Vanessa Redgrave in their duo as a whole, just because of
for the third act. I think
just for that third act. Yeah. Not that I love Saoirse. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but that's not her best performance.
For some reason, I don't have like a super strong memory of Saoirse's performance in Mary Queen of Scots.
There's not like a moment that I like remember.
Yeah,
and I'm not. And I know I was told by a good friend of ours, an AwardsWatch contributor, Nicole Ackman, who loves that movie. And we recently were talking about it, and I do need to rewatch it. But I will, and it probably is a good time to rewatch it because of the fact that I have this one so fresh on the mind.
Yeah, for context.
But when I remember watching that, I was just like, I was kind of disappointed, and especially in Saoirse's performance. So
Lila said Katharine Hepburn and Saoirse Ronan, besides both playing Jo March, also played the role of Mary Stuart. How would you rank Vanessa Redgrave's performance among them? I have not seen Katharine Hepburn's version, so
neither. I can't comment.
But between, like I said, between her and Saoirse, I slightly prefer Vanessa because I just watched it and remember it. So also, that's really the only reason.
Also, too, Saoirse and Vanessa are connected. Atonement.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I just remembered that.
Not just Mary Queen of Scots, but Atonement as well. So there you go.
Wow. That is a real passing of the baton moment right
there.
It
really is. Literally in the 2-hour runtime.
Just blew my mind. Yes. Wow. We got another one from Joey Gentile. He got a lot to say this week.
Good Lord.
Janet Suzman should have won. And by actress noms to Best Picture rules, she should have won. So you could easily argue she's second. Is this a case there where the rules would change due to bias or would actually count here? Well, I'm not going to talk about who I think was the runner-up quite yet, because we're not at that part yet. But in general, yes, it helps to be in a Best Picture nominee. Sure. Especially if you're the only Best Picture nominee in your group, it does mean that more Academy members will have at least seen you. I don't think it's like this automatic boost over other contenders necessarily, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that and leave the rest to the end.
I think it changes with time. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's always the same. I think that I know Joey, Joey, he's speaking more towards how actresses win more nowadays than even in the past. You know what I mean? And especially like even coming off like last year, that's the two top contenders were from Best Picture nominated films, and so it usually the guard goes, if you're winning the majority of the awards or a sweeper, then you're probably going to win the Oscar. Or if that's not happening, then you tend to like lean towards someone that's in a Best Picture nominated film, just because, like you mentioned, Kevin, most people are going to see that performance, but there are exceptions to every rule. There are, and this one is clearly that, because like if it's the performance of the year from a highly talked about talent, right, and it's also very worthy, and the BAFTAs are at the time after rather than they are during Oscar voting, right? That can affect it too. Also, by the way, the fact that this ceremony was in April 10th, we would have all not been able to survive. So just want to point that out there as well. But no, I don't think it is, every year is different. And as you know that, because every episode of the show is different. It's not the same. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Another one from Joey.
Good Lord. Okay.
Did you know that in my personal one-on-one video interview for In Session Film with Janet Suzman, now available on YouTube, that she told me Alexandra was offered to her, and had she not done it, Elizabeth Taylor was to play the role. How do you think Lizzie would have done? I'll just say I feel like I already have a sense of what that looks like in general. Mm-hmm. I feel like it looks a little bit like a Cleopatra for Elizabeth Taylor, and I don't think it would have worked. Although at least it would have been some fiery kind of star power.
I think we would have had a much longer conversation about that movie if she was in it.
Probably. Yeah. Yes. So there you go. Fritz said, recast all 5 actresses in the 5 nominated parts. Ooh. So, yes, knowing this question ahead of time, of course, I did write down my answers here. I'm going to go with Julie Christie and Klute.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you think of that?
Yeah, yeah, that's where I would have gone.
Of the 5.
Of the 5.
Or of the other 4, I should say.
Yeah.
I would do, I guess, Jane Fonda in Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, she would have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's put Glenda Jackson in Nicholas and Alexandra. I think she would have more screen presence and more of a commanding quality that could elevate parts of the film.
Okay. I'm
sure.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah. That makes sense. Adds the prickliness that character probably needs.
Exactly.
For the ways that they're twisting the knife behind the scenes. Yes.
Right. Vanessa Redgrave in McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
I mean, I might put Glenda Jackson actually in that role, and I would put Vanessa Redgrave in Nicholas and Alexandra, and then I would
Yeah, that could work too.
Janet Suzman definitely in Mary Queen of
Scots.
Scots. Yeah.
Yeah.
Giving nothing, and then giving nothing throughout that movie, and then you'd be like, okay, see if you can act in that third act. You know what I mean? It's a good test for her.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good combo.
Yeah, I think we did it. Good job, Kevin.
Yeah, good job, us. You kind of amended it.
I hope. Yeah, it was teamwork.
Cinema Sex Kitten said, this was the year the Sonny and Cher show debuts. Pick one of these women to host a 70s kitschy variety show.
Jane? Yeah,
that would be a very strange mode for her, considering her kind of like activism and stuff.
But I think she would do it, and then it would be like undertones of political.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
You know how like we all thought those workout videos were kind of like oh, it swept the nation, but then it's like paying for political activism behind the scenes that we found out years later.
That's
so
true.
like it would be like, oh, I get to use my name and my platform of them to be to use it. Yeah, I think that, and also too, I think she is inherently funny as hell. So it would make.
And she's hosted stuff. She's hosted the Oscars.
Exactly. Yeah. So it would.
So I think of the five, she makes the most sense, even if it's not like the best fit for me. The only other one I could even consider is, for some reason, I'm picturing like a Julie Christie type of show that's like very 70s and bohemian and something. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure.
All right. A Cinema Sex Kitten said, this is the first year that we have all actresses still living. Which of these actresses do you think has the best chance of winning or even being nominated in the 2020s, even in the supporting category?
Probably Jane, because she's the one actively working and everything still.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like somebody could put her. I feel like Jane Fonda could do like a pieces of a woman, bursting kind of role. Get a bunch of critics love.
Yeah.
Have a lot of career retrospectives.
Sort of what happened with Youth, which didn't go all the way, but that was only one scene in that movie. But something akin to that, like in a more artsy project, as opposed to like some of her more commercial plays that she's doing nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I would love Julie Christie to come back.
Oh, yes.
Just like
me too.
Pop in, do a movie, go away. Kind of go away again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She, you know, she kind of does that.
Pull up Renee Zellweger.
Yeah. Only much better. But yes. I think that, Jane, realistically, out of all of them, seems to be the right answer there.
I think so. Maybe Vanessa Redgrave, if she turns in like a super impactful, like a Foxcatcher kind of thing, but like with more material.
Oh, God, she was so good in that movie.
You know, something like that I could see. But Joey Gentili, one more question. Cast these 70s talents in the roles above. Diane Carroll, Karen Black, Barbara Barry, Carol Kane, and Ally McGraw.
I did write this down.
Okay, good. All right. Let's hear it.
I have Ally McGraw in Mary Queen of Scots.
Me too.
Okay. I have Barbara Barry in Sunday Bloody Sunday.
I have Barbara Barry and Nicholas and Alexandra because I ran out of options.
I put Karen Black in Nicholas and Alexandra. And and then I put Carol Kane, sorry, in McCabe Mrs Miller, because I thought
that would have been really fun.
That would have been really fun. And Diane Carroll and Klute. I thought that would have been. I thought she would have been.
Yeah, I have Diane Carroll and Klute as well. Yeah. I put Karen Black in McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Okay.
Because I think she would have a lot of fun with that role.
I think either one of them would have a good time in that role.
Yeah.
That would have been
yeah.
For the accent alone, that would have been just interesting. Would the accent have stayed the same? Do you think the accent would have stayed the same? Do you think they would have gone Cockney?
No. I think it would have been too much of a struggle.
Yeah.
But yeah. I put Carol Kane in Sunday Bloody Sunday. So
Yeah. We're close.
We're close. Yeah. All right, let's get to a few snub picks here, and then we'll close on out. Dark Shaka said, did Ruth Gordon deserve a nomination for Harold and Maude? How about Jessica Walter for her turn and play Misty for me?
Yes, and then no.
Okay, fair enough.
No, Harold and
For
Maude.
me,
Harold
Ruth
and Maude.
Gordon is, yeah.
Yeah.
Ruth
That's
Gordon
what I'm.
should be here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Ruth Gordon should be in
Yeah.
here. Harold and Maude. Perfect movie.
Yeah.
It's great. Also 90 minutes, so everybody out there that complains about runtime, you can watch Harold and Maude. Jessica Walter, yeah, it's a fine performance. I mean, it would not be one of the first ones that I would select.
Yeah. I would also add in as another potential snub, Elaine May for A New Leaf. How about that?
She's great. She
Yeah.
is great in that movie.
Yes. Christoph said Kitty Wynn won Best Actress in Cannes for The Panic in Needle Park. Why isn't she here?
She wasn't anywhere on the award season, to be fair.
Yeah.
Kind of just went to Cannes, and then somehow, like, how that happens at Cannes, you win an award there, and then you're not seen throughout the rest of award season.
Yeah.
Cannes not really about the performances all the time, usually carrying over.
And then Eric Maxwell Brunn said, would you have nominated Sybil Shepherd here for The Last Picture Show, or do you think she's supporting?
She is completely supporting in that movie. Like, Leachman's the closest one I would give to a lead, not Sybil Shepherd, in my opinion.
I think I think all the women are supporting.
No, I agree.
Honestly, I think it should just be Timothy Bottoms and lead.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, like, if you're making me have to choose one, then I would say Lawrence Leachman. But no, Sybil Shepherd is supporting.
All right, we're finally here at our final segment. Thank you for all the great questions, as always. So let's decide who we think was the runner-up to Jane Fonda. I feel like we didn't even really give any indications leading up to this, who we think it might be. So I am genuinely curious what you think, Ryan. Who's the runner-up?
I mean, personally, I know what I like, but generally, looking at the race, looking at the nominations, looking at who is in this and the time period and everything, even though the film was not nominated for Best Picture, and even though we talked about it earlier, I think she was the previous winner and from the year before, and they really responded to it outside of Best Picture in a lot of categories. I think Glenda Jackson in Sunday Bloody Sunday was the runner-up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's
a
pretty distant runner-up, to be fair, but
distant runner-up. Yeah, I agree with you.
Hey, there you go.
I think Glenda Jackson was the runner-up. I think it's a very showy performance, also, and showing a different side even from the year before. And listen, they had no problem rewarding her again in 1973. So, what's a few years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could say Janet Suzman was a contender just because of the Best Picture nomination. I don't think the performance was there, but I think she maybe could have put up a fight. I don't know, but I don't think there was an urgency with Julie Christie to reward her again, especially with the film not really doing very well. And I think with Vanessa Redgrave, it just wasn't strong enough. And the fact, I mean, this is another win in Glenda Jackson's favor for me, is that she had Mary Queen of Scots at the same year in the same category, So, yeah, I would agree that Glenda Jackson, I think Glenda Jackson fever was at a high in the early 70s.
Really was. It really was.
So there you go. And finally, our final question for you. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
Okay. I love Julie Christie and McCabe Mrs. I think it is the best film of all the movies here. But I mean, come on. It's Jane. You gotta vote for Jane. She's so good in this. It's such a great winner. It's an all-time winner. To take it away from Jane Fonda, it would I can't do that. And plus, I don't want to get people to yell at me for that either. And it is an undeniable performance. Sometimes in years you just sit there and you go, well, that's a great performance in there, but it's not the winner. Like, the winner deserves to go exactly where it goes. And so I think if you take Jane out of Klute, I think that you lose a lot. And I think that while I love Julie Christie in McCabe Mrs. I think if we put somebody else in there, I think you would have gotten a different performance, but I still think the essence of Constance Miller would have stayed intact. And so ultimately, I think that the movie makes or breaks off of Jane Fonda's performance. And so I would go with Jane Fonda.
Yeah, that's a very good distinction you make there. It is the actress imbuing the part more than being an interesting character, which I think Constance Miller is. But yeah, I think character and performance, Jane Fonda is absolutely my winner as well. So we once again agree on that. And yeah, I think it's one of the best winners that we've ever had in Best Actress. I think it is 100% an example of an actress winning for the right role at the right time, and probably her best performance at the end of the day. So that doesn't happen all the time. So there you go.
There you go.
We're on a hot streak with winners in this category because I have agreed with them since 68. But Ryan McQuade, thank you so much for joining me. This was a super long, super fun breakdown of Best Actress. Thank you for bringing all of the takes and everything that you do. It's you're always no half measures, which I appreciate. You always put in the work.
I try to put as much detail into this as possible. I try to watch as many movies as I can, so then potentially in a couple of years you invite me back on, and then I won't disappoint you again. It's because mostly I only come on every couple of years because these episodes are so freaking long, and that's how long it takes for people to finish them. So
yeah, it's a commitment.
Yeah, it's a commitment, but also I love doing this and I love being on. And thank you, Kevin, so much for having me on. And hopefully we can do this again down the road.
Alrighty. Well, where can people find more of you on the internet?
Well, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Ryan McQuade 77. And you can find my work over at AwardsWatch.com, the executive editor over there. We have the Awards Watch podcast, where Kevin's been a guest before. We have myself, Eric Anderson, Sophia Simonello, Dan Bayer, Nicole Ackman, Zach Laws, tons of people that have Josh Parham, tons of people that have been on this show many times before. Lots of us just talking about the Oscar season, talking about movies, top 5 lists. We do Oscar retrospectives. We're going to be doing some more interesting stuff over the next couple of weeks during the summer. So look forward to that. I'm over also at In Session Film, where I'm doing like movie series and recent reviews and our shows that are now also on YouTube as well. So you can go type in Session Film and find all that stuff there. New websites up as well too. And then also got stuff at the playlist and FilmSpeak and 9,000 places that, like Kevin said, I won't do too much, but
one of the busiest men.
Yeah. Well, I only am trying to keep up with you, my friend. And but again, thank you so much, Kevin, for having me on. This was an absolute thrill, and I love you, my friend. I really do.
Yeah, thank you so much. I always love our conversations together. So with all that, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson and at Oscar Runner-Up. Instagram at And the Runner-Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/And the Runner-Up is, where you can hear some bonus episodes, including some with our friend Ryan here. So next week, we will be discussing the 1972 Best Actress lineup, where the nominees were Liza Minnelli in Cabaret, Diana Ross in Lady Sings the Blues, Maggie Smith in Travels with My Aunt, Cicely Tyson in Sounder, and Liv Ullmann in The Emigrants, with the winner being Liza Minnelli. So with that, thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you, Kevin.
And I will bid you all adieu.